Chapter 1 Before Doom. The godfather of the FPS genre. You can say whoever you believe this is, from Valve to Bungie to Retro Studios to Monolith to Rareware, Bethesda, but all those people owe their success to the actual FPS godfather, id Software. id Software is the only godfather to me in those history books. That history starts with the company being founded by John Romero as the programmer, Tom Hall as a game designer, Adrian John Carmack, with Adrian being an artist and John being another programmer. And neither one of those guys is brothers despite sharing the same last name. And if anyone says they're brothers, they're gonna get a piece of my rocket launcher I got right here. Before creating the bloodiest games of the 90s and being synonymous with first-person shooters, the four founders created a cute little children's game series released on December 14th, 1990 called the Commander Keen Trilogy. It was published by Apogee Studios, which at the time they stood tall as a decent publisher in the PC gaming sphere, averaging around $7,000 a month in purchases. But that $7,000 a month got slapped in the face by the four founders because the month Commander Keen released, they made 30,000 buckaroos. That's a $23,000 difference just due to four guys. It's safe to say that Commander Keen proved to these founders that they didn't need a publisher, or even to work with other companies. All four of them, Tom Hall as that game designer, John Carmack and John Romero as these programmers, and Adrian Carmack as the artist, all saw the profit that Apogee and Softdisk made off of their work. And they thought the best thing to do was to give their boss the finger and go make those legendary games someplace else. The team went from being with Softdisk under the alias Ideas from the Deep to being known as id Software when they founded the company on February 1st of 1991. After creating the company, they all started to bring their computers to John Carmack's house. They'd geek out about everything, make 4 more episodes of Commander Keen, and then they'd have late nights staying up and playing Dungeons and Dragons together. Those co-worker relationships became a friendship, working all day side by side and playing D&D all night side by side. They saw success with all their other games like Commander Keen and Hover Tank and Catacombs 3D, so they were on the right pathway of being able to have the freedom that every independent artist craves. The freedom to make whatever you want without financial restriction. Many people do believe that id Software created the FPS genre, and lots of people even think that Wolfenstein 3D is the first FPS ever. That is simply just not true. There were others, with Maze War being the first, and even id Software had an FPS game before Wolfenstein called Catacombs 3D, and then another called Hover Tank. But these aren't the games you hear about in a crowd when you hear the words id Software. These aren't even games you think about. What we think about is Wolfenstein, Quake, Rage, and most importantly, Doom. Those are the franchises that made them that godfather of the FPS genre. Because I think it's important that we acknowledge they didn't create the genre, but sometimes popularizing it can be just as important as creating it. Because id Software is the creators of the modern FPS, even if they didn't create the very first one. In the eyes of history, sometimes it doesn't matter who was first, it matters who was the one who popularized the art, or perfected it for the public. That's exactly what id Software did. They perfected the first-person shooter game and they popularized it to the point where every gaming company tried to copy them. First-person shooters in the 90s were just called Doom clones, which shows the reach of id's influence. They had such an impact that more copies of Doom were installed on PCs than Windows 95 at one point. Tell me the last time you ever heard of a video game installing more copies than an entire Windows OS for a computer. That is the power of id Software. id Software wasn't just known for blasting demons and being the ADHD run-and-gun simulators either. They are seen today as contrarians to the video game landscape that's become flooded with hyper-realistic military shooters like Body Cam or gritty story-driven playable movies. id today relies on the same formulas that they relied on in the 1990s. How many times have you caught yourself saying about a video game developer that they've lost their way, or they just don't make games the way they used to? Bungie, Rareware, and almost every first-person shooter company I mentioned earlier would fall into that category. But not id. They defied all expectations in the 90s, and they have stuck to their roots through the decades, which I can't recall another game studio that's really even ever done that. Even the ones that are still good, like Rockstar Games, they evolve with the times. id Software is the only one that might prove the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that doesn't mean they didn't have a low point. id Software lost itself and found Jesus in 2016, or in their case, they found Doom Guy, I guess. For any of you unfamiliar, I made this timeline sheet for all of you that maps out the golden age of id Software, the dark ages, not Doom the Dark Ages, we're gonna get to that later, but id's dark ages. And the if it ain't broke, don't fix it era. id did have a low point that many fans would say started with something like Doom 3 that was overall disliked by the fan base. But I need to also point out that there's still games within the Dark Ages that I enjoyed. And since there are games from the Dark Ages I enjoy, there's games from the Golden Ages I don't really care for, we're also going to be ranking all of these games as we go through the video on our nifty tier list right here that at the top says Sinfully S tier. B is Baron of Hell B tier, we got Caco Demon C tier, all the way down to the bottom. I don't think anything's going to end up in F tier, but we're just going to call F tier Imp. I started the video talking about the founders and how they formed this company. My biggest question moving forward is, did the 4 founders help id Software stick to their roots with Doom 2016? And no, they didn't help with that at all. All 4 of these guys, they weren't even with the company anymore by that point in our timeline. How is id Software still doing good? What happened to those original 4 co-founders? id Software is really only successful because of them. But unfortunately, and this was the case for the founders, success is often achieved by those who don't see the failure right in front of them. Wolfenstein, then Doom, then Quake, these were the successes, but their friendships didn't survive the success. That's the failure right in front of them. On the day of Doom's release, this is what their office looked like. They were working on it until the last minute before it came out. They're full of excitement, full of anticipation. This is an office of people who love doing what they do. Let's fast forward to the day of Quake's release and look at it. It's a vacant wasteland, and the only one who was there on the day of release was John Romero. id went from being a group of friends who wanted to try their hardest at making a good game to being a company that nobody wanted to be at, and they were all just tired. There was too much crunch time, and there was no friendships anymore. Everyone wanted to be with id in 1993. And by 1996, not a single soul wanted to be at the godfather of the first-person shooter genre anymore. But let's start before the success. Let's start with the first big hitter as an independent company and the start of the golden age in our timeline with Wolfenstein 3D. The newly created id Software is wrapping up in their final contract obligations with Softdisk and Apogee. They released Catacombs 3D in November of 1991, which capped off their contract. And now the team had to sit down and think about what their next IP was going to be. John Carmack wanted to do something a little more challenging and move into the direction that would actually make a 3D game. This lines up with John Carmack as a person who was always known for challenging himself even back in the 1980s when he tried to steal an Apple II computer from his high school so he could program more. I stole soda and candy growing up. Kids went to jail for dope and alcohol. John Carmack went to jail for a year for stealing an Apple II. To learn. What a badass little nerd. What the hell? So due to John Carmack's programmer intellect, the team actually ignored their game designer Tom Hall, who wanted to make a third Commander Keen trilogy after the 6 games they've already produced. After ignoring what he wanted, that's when they decided that their next game would be the one where, I'm not joking, cue the drum roll, the game where Adolf is a giant mech suit robot and you can blow his face off. I'm waiting for somebody to tell me a more fun concept than fighting German soldiers and blowing up the world's most evil dictator in a boss fight where he's in a mech suit with chain guns. I'll wait. Is Wolfenstein as cool as the concept of that boss fight, though? It's complicated. It's basically exactly what you would expect as a predecessor of Doom. It's not as revolutionary as people might make it out to be. It follows a similar format as their previous Catacombs 3D, but now you got guns. It's actually not even the first Wolfenstein game, which I think is a really hard misconception. id Software bought the IP Castle Wolfenstein, which was a franchise with only 2 games that released on the Apple II in the 80s. John Romero was a huge fan of these. and id bought the IP for $5,000, which is cheaper than my Honda Civic outside, but whatever, you know, I'm not jealous at all that they bought this massive IP and made it huge off of less money than my car, but you know, whatever, it's fine. Wolfenstein 3D had its final render at 4 AM just the day before release on May 5th of 1992. When playing it, you can tell it's a lot smoother than Catacombs 3D, there's lots of weapons to pick from, and there's different enemies to fight, but that is kinda about it. You ever feel like you just can't shit on an old game because it meant a lot for the industry? That's how I feel right now, but too bad. I'm probably only going to be offending like the 0.1% of Commander Keen fans and then the 0.5% of Wolfenstein 3D fans when I say I do not care for this game at all. And the only thing those two fan bases have in common is that BJ Blazkowicz is the grandfather of Commander Keen. No, I'm not joking. That is your fun trivia fact of the day. The universes do cross over, and you're welcome to the 5 fans or whoever who cares about that fact. It's a very boring game. It's very outdated. And it feels like it was made in 1992, and not in the good way. The programmer John Romero would literally agree with me when I say this. He stated at one point that the level design for Wolfenstein 3D was the most boring job he ever did in his career. Now, John Romero has also said stuff defending Wolfenstein, like the year before it released, they came out with 13 games, more than one a month. There was crunch time for every single one of them, and Wolfenstein didn't have that deadline. And so, quoting John Romero, here's what he had to say about it. Your focus is on completion when in crunch mode. But when you have no deadline, you can focus on exploration, and that's why people don't remember those 13 games we did the year before. But they do remember Wolfenstein 3D. And even though the fan base for the Castle Wolfenstein games on the Apple II was much smaller, with only around 30,000 people who played the games before Wolfenstein 3D, Romero and id Software insisted people would want Wolfenstein because it wasn't the top-down game of the original, and it had people looking at things in 3D for the first time ever. What Romero said first, though, is my biggest problem with Wolfenstein 3D. It's very mazy, like to the point of spending over 30 minutes on a small mission just because you can't find your way out of the labyrinth of blue and desert brown walls. There's no distinction to make one place look different, there's no landmarks, nothing. The level design is the thing that Wolfenstein fails at. It'll feel like you're in highway hypnosis when you're running down just blue hallways all the time. It would have taken a lot out of id Software, but I do kind of wish that they developed upon this level design a lot more and that they could have done some new things with the textures, new things with the environments, and added landmarks so you knew where you were at sometimes. I also really wish they went with some of the original plans that they had for Wolfenstein instead of what they did. They were originally going to have hiding dead bodies as a feature, using stealth, searching bodies for loot, unlocking chests, and according to Romero, all of these activities were dropped from the final product because they thought the really fun part of the game was the running and gunning. I just wish I could have seen how the original product would have come out. Running and gunning is cool, but it just doesn't work well for me in Wolfenstein 3D in the same way that Doom handles it, and that's kinda just due to the difficulty. If you aren't ancient like I am, I'm gonna explain what hit scan is because it's not really in any modern video games. Hit scan is how your bullets register to your enemies or their bullets to you. If your bullets aren't real projectiles in the air within the game engine, then where you click, your bullet just teleports from your gun to the enemy rather than flying midair to your target. Wolfenstein 3D's enemies all use hit scan weapons, so you constantly have situations like this happening. You will die over and over and over again to someone shooting you who's hidden in a corner, or multiple guys firing you at the exact same time because all their bullets are teleporting at you and hitting you immediately, or you can even get one shot on higher difficulties. You can call it outdated, you can call it bad game design, but it becomes infuriating after a while, and it prevents you from being able to do the run and gun gameplay that Romero says is the highlight of the game. And the only way to do running and gunning is by memorizing the enemy spawn locations, which nobody has ever done on their first playthrough of any video game. It's just trial and error over and over, or saving constantly through this irritating playthrough. And I know they could have done projectile firing because one enemy type in Wolfenstein 3D does use projectile, and they are by far the most fun enemy to fight. So this isn't just a thing where they couldn't do this on Wolfenstein 3D back in the day. They could. They literally do it in the game. The boss fights are some of the best parts, and I do kind of recommend trying out the game all the way up until the Adolf boss fight just to see if you like it. But I'm going to be slapping Wolfenstein 3D into the Baron of Hell B tier for id Software games due to that hit scan, the difficulty, and just the awful level design. B tier isn't bad. I think it has a lot of influence. I think that there's some good things about it. I like the different guns. I like the different enemies. I like the boss fights. But it would probably be C tier if it wasn't for the influence Wolfenstein 3D had. If they didn't make the bullets as strong as they are or hide the enemies in the way they do, then I'd be a little bit more forgiving to the hit scan due to the time period that the game came from. But I'm sure if I lived in 1992, this game would probably be an arch-vile A tier, but I don't look like this, so I'm sorry, guys. Wolfenstein 3D proved to be extremely successful by selling over 250,000 copies by the end of just 1995, just a few years after release. And I love some of the stuff about it, but I respect this game way more than I actually enjoy it. So I think my ranking of Baron of Hell is fair. Wolfenstein 3D, you paved the way for success, and even if I don't care for you in a lot of ways, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be respected. Chapter 2. Doom changed everything. The developer who was originally against Wolfenstein 3D, that game designer Tom Hall, he eventually came around to really latching onto it. The founders team wanted to figure out where to go next. What should id Software do now that they are on the map as one of the great and upcoming game devs? Their next game would be Doom 1, but a quote that I adore regarding Doom 1's development is said by David Kushner, who wrote the biographical tale on John Romero and John Carmack called Masters of Doom, and a lot of my history comes straight from that book. David said, "If we can get Doom done, it's going to be the fucking coolest game that the planet Earth has ever fucking seen in its entire history." This quote is not meant to be serious. It's meant to mimic a lot of the philosophy of how id Software worked and how they made decisions as a company. Just like how they made Wolfenstein with the mindset of focusing on running and gunning, they made Doom with the mindset of stripping away all the fat and just making the most fun thing they possibly could out there. The relationship between Wolfenstein and Doom can be summed up as simple as Wolfenstein walked so Doom can run. Wolfenstein was the start of popularizing a kind of new genre, and then Doom was the perfected version of that genre. Tom Hall is really the only one who didn't care for the idea of Doom, but there's a big pattern you're going to see here, and that's that Tom Hall constantly gets thrown underneath the bus by the rest of the team. His Commander Keen trilogy idea was ignored, the Wolfenstein 2 idea was ignored, and the other three co-founders were just focused on making an enemy that was more evil than the German soldiers from Wolfenstein. So they just picked demons, naturally. Like, that's the only thing you can really think of that's more evil. The tone and the blood of the game was inspired off of Evil Dead, which explains the double-barrel super shotgun in Doom 2, because that's the classic boomstick of the Evil Dead trilogy. And then the science fiction locales were inspired off of the Aliens movie, which gave Adrian Carmack a starting point artistically for how the design of the demons, the blood, and all these areas were gonna go. Speaking of another fun little trivia fact, Fox Movie Studios actually asked id Software to make an Aliens video game. And it immediately declined because they were in the middle of working on Doom at the time, and they just said, "We don't have time for this. We got too much going on." I have one major quote related to the level design of Doom from John Romero. And that quote is,
"If it looked like Wolfenstein, any room looked like Wolfenstein, you have failed."
Making the level design different was key here, and I am all in for that because dear Lord knows I was so done with the mazy levels of Wolfenstein. There's a ton of history I can say about Doom. There is so much here, but one of my favorite pieces of stupidity from id Software during the history of this game was basically that they played the lottery when deciding the name of the demon shooter. Doom sounds so iconic. You would think there has to be some story behind it, but this is where the name comes from. They were picking between titles like Green and Pissed and Attack of the Attackers, which those are so bad that they make me want to wash my mouth out with soap. And finally, one day, the team was watching Color of Money with Tom Cruise and Paul Newman, and this line was said.
Doom.
Here we are with me holding Doom guns, and we're talking about the golden age because of a movie about pool. I guess it's funny how ideas sometimes start. We're at the end of 1992, and we're about to start the official development of Doom. That good old founder, Tom Hall, created a manuscript known as the Doom Bible that had all the textures, the story beats, the dialogue, and all the level designs for the game. He had ideas in here like taking a monorail from level to level, which that eventually just became the Doom splash screen that happens in between missions. When the crew looked over this Doom Bible, though, which was full of information, he spent a lot of time on this. Some of them were okay with it, though, and some of them weren't. But there was only one who passionately was against it. John Carmack hated it. He said, story in a video game is like story in PORN. It's expected to be there, but it's not important. Let's talk about John Carmack briefly so we can understand the type of person he is. This guy, when psychiatrically evaluated, the doctor described him as a brain with two legs who has no empathy for anybody. By 15 months old, he was speaking in full sentences. Carmack also just never kept things from the past. He didn't keep the old games he programmed. He didn't keep pictures, nothing.
He doesn't flinch at torture, human trafficking, or genocide.
In all out seriousness, though, John Carmack was the smartest and most valuable member of id Software. None of the founders would ever disagree with that, but he always lived in the present, and he was obsessed with moving forward the technology they were working on at id. And because of that, he was also kind of a dick to ideas he just didn't agree with. He's not really the guy you wanted to be on the bad side of. He could overstep boundaries even if he was the MVP of the team. Tom Hall had a lot of his ideas scrapped. He became growingly distant from id as everyone was just rejecting him and just ignoring all of his different stuff. It made him kind of depressed. He didn't really want any intricate storyline either. He just wanted the audience to have a reason for being on Mars, a reason for fighting the demons. And even though I don't think it's really needed, I know if somebody asked me what is the story of Doom 1 and Doom 2, all I could say is, well, some green and pissed guy was mad his bunny died, and so he kills demons. That would be my story description. I don't know anything else about Doom 1 and Doom 2 when it comes to the story. The original demos of Doom 1 are the closest thing you will ever get to Tom Hall's vision, where it was 4 Marines sitting around a card table until they're under attack by demons. Nobody saw eye to eye on his slightly story-focused vision. Even John Romero, who did always kind of want friends, he always wanted to be your friend in the workplace, Tom Hall described him as being somewhat bipolar and became increasingly distant from him as well. I go back and forth about Tom Hall's ideas for Doom because I think they were ahead of their time. He wanted to revolutionize story in video games, whereas everybody else just wanted to revolutionize gameplay. Doom had to pick one or the other, and I think they did make the right choice even if it screwed over Tom. He would even agree with this. He said in the past that you can't have a tech focus and a story focus simultaneously. Your video game has to have focus. And I agree with Tom Hall on that. I talk about that a lot on this channel. I don't like games that don't have focus. Doom was right for picking the tech focus, but Tom Hall accurately predicted and had ideas for where video gaming would go as a medium throughout the late 2000s and 2010s because story-driven games took off. They're everywhere now. So Tom Hall wasn't really wrong. He began to feel isolated, and eventually he stopped showing up to work because nobody at id cared about any of his ideas or valued his input. John Romero and John Carmack met up like a couple of the best buds they were to talk about what to do with Tom Hall for being absent. Both Johns and Adrian were putting everything they could into Doom's release. They were trying their best every single day, sleeping on the job site floors, every day ordering pizza and Diet Coke. That's actually taken from one of their quotes, I didn't just make that up. But they're giving everything to Doom. And Tom Hall seemed depressed and uninterested in it, and that's kind of their fault, that's kind of his fault, it was a little bit of both of them. They all eventually agreed that forcing him to retire from the company would be for the best, for his own mental health and for the company. Tom Hall went on to work at 3D Realms. You might know this company because they made a little famous game that you have heard of called Duke Nukem 3D. In spite of all the hate Tom Hall gets, Duke Nukem 3D is another one of my favorite first-person shooters ever, so good job. Back to Doom. id was working on hyping up Doom way before it was ever released. They were crazy about this. They called it Wolfenstein times a million in one press release. In another release, they called it the greatest piece of PC programming ever built. Why are you saying all this before even you start making the game? Oh my God, that's gonna blow up in your face. I was 100% wrong. Most game companies, when they talk about their games and say it's like a quadruple A game from Ubisoft, it normally blows up in their face. But Doom is the exception that proves the rule. Because guys, I'm just gonna tell you how it is. Doom 1 is sinfully S tier for me, and it's one of my favorite video games ever created. Doom just does everything better than Wolfenstein. The environments are creepier, and there's an actual ambiance of dread everywhere you look. The skyboxes show this off as well, where each one of them looks like they were ripped straight from a Megadeth album. And the enemy and the gun variety, oh, just holy shit. You can hear when doors are being opened, and you get the audio cues for the monsters, so you always know when something's coming at you, which kind of helps with that running and gunning feeling that you love doing in Doom, because nothing ever catches you off guard. The level design also feels much more complex than Wolfenstein 3D because of something called binary space partitioning. That's a bunch of hoopla. I ain't no rocket scientist. I have a rocket launcher, but I'm going to explain this in the only way that my brain actually understands it. Basically, whatever you are looking at is rendered, and whatever you aren't looking at is not rendered. So when I am looking at this wall right in front of me, everything behind me is gone and not rendered. Stairs render as they enter your line of sight, and this makes it so the game can run better, and it also can give off some illusions of 3D, because is Doom actually 3D? Kinda? Binary space partitioning does allow for that illusion of 3D at certain points, like with elevators and some stairwells, because Doom cannot put a platform over another platform. Don't ask me why, but that's how the engine works. You can't put a square above another square. But that doesn't mean the square doesn't exist. Considering where you're shooting, your bullets are going to move up and down depending on where the enemy is, even if they're not directly in your line of sight, which can lead a lot of people to think that this is on the same x-axis. But the true determiner of a 3D environment is if there is a z-axis. This is proven through cacodemons that can fly straight into a wall and move up it until they move through a window. So not everything is on the same x-axis, so there is a y and an x-axis, and that means that there is a z-axis. So much of it is still the illusion of 3D, like the enemy sprites, the guns, the projectiles. They don't have any 3D elements whatsoever. But binary space partitioning helps with this in the actual environments, some of which still have 2D illusions, but there is a 3D since the z-axis does exist. So we get to a situation where we have about a 50% 3D game, a 50% 2D game. So that's when you get everybody on the internet just screaming at each other saying Doom is 3D or Doom is not 3D, and they try to explain themselves. And that's why the game is dubbed 2.5D. It's this midway point between 2D and 3D, because there's a lot of 3D environment stuff, but there's also a lot of 2D illusions that are helped out through binary space partitioning. That partitioning and this 2.5D process is the most revolutionary thing to come out of Doom 1. And since FPS wasn't even a term in 1993, every FPS, because of this 2.5D process, all the way until Quake in 1996, they were all just going to be referred to as Doom clones. Which, like, if I made a game and it was just chalked up to being a Doom clone, I'd be a little bit sad, but hey, I get it. It was a big fucking game. BFG. Doom was such a big deal that even when I was younger, I was playing it in 2004, which was over 10 years after its release. I played Doom in my youth, in the 2000s with my dad, and that brings us to a major point that I want to hammer home for anyone who has never played Doom. No, it's not outdated, and I would complain that Wolfenstein is outdated. There are games in the early 2000s that I would say are outdated, but Doom in the present day, the year of our Lord 2025, or whatever year you're watching this video, who knows, it still remains one of the best shooters around. And the couple of reasons as to why Doom isn't outdated is because of the fixed level design from Wolfenstein, where nothing feels very mazy outside of just a couple of maps. You can figure your way around. There's landmarks of crucified individuals on walls, different types of textures to tell you where you're at. The floor can sometimes be acid. There's explosive barrels that litter hallways. There's elevators, and the maps just feel more linear than Wolfenstein 3D. They're easier to navigate, and that's a plus for it not feeling outdated. So the other reason it's not outdated is because the hit scan of Wolfenstein was also thrown out the window. You have the possessed soldiers are the only hit scan enemies in the entire game, while everyone else either uses melee attacks or actual projectiles. So now instead of memorizing every spawn point, doing trial and error, and just having a very annoying experience, you can dance around projectiles while having a battle with 20 enemies that aren't all just going to kill you instantly. It creates fast-paced gameplay. It really embodies that running and gunning that they talked about with Wolfenstein. It makes you think about who you're going to attack first, which for me is always the possessed soldiers, since they're the ones who have hit scan attacks. And that's why id Software made them so weak. They take one shotgun shell to kill most of the time, and that's because they are the only hit scan opponents. If you don't take them out first, they're gonna quickly penetrate Doom Guy's aura with bullets until he's dead. And this projectile mechanic with other enemies gives you the badass moments that you crave from a running and gunning shooter. If you turned all of these guys into German soldiers from Wolfenstein, you'd be dead faster than Tom Hall being fired from id Software. The boss fights got an upgrade as well. Wolfenstein, you had to hide behind cover, grab health, and pop out and then spam the boss with bullets, then go hide again, get more health, and rinse and repeat. It felt more familiar to the way you'd play a cover shooter. In Doom, the first episode with the Baron of Hells, I can fight them head on and dodge their bullets. It's also fantastic design to make the Baron of Hells the first boss because they become a regular enemy type later on in the game. I'm gonna pretend I'm somebody who never played Doom growing up for a second. This is a 30-year-old game, and I know I said it's not outdated, but that doesn't mean there's nothing outdated about it. You know those games you're like, this isn't really outdated, but there's this one thing. It's like GoldenEye 64. You can play that on a PC emulator, and it's one of the greatest FPS games ever created. The one thing that makes it feel outdated is that darn N64 controller that was designed for platformers and not FPSs. There's occasionally some bad map designs. There's about 4 or 5 times in the entire game, and it really starts to show up in Episode 4, Thy Flesh Consumed, which was added to Doom 1 in the Ultimate Doom Edition that released in April 30th, 1995. Some of these later maps feel a little bit like a maze, and it's not just the level design, but it's also how you always start off new episodes of Doom with just a pistol. And the last episode starts you off on such a difficult note that it can be brutal recollecting all of your weapons again. It just doesn't feel fair starting with just the pistol. You remember how I said that Doom isn't 3D earlier, so yeah, you can't look up or down, you stare dead ahead. If there's enemies above you or below you, you can still hit them, but you're pointing just straight ahead, you're not even pointing at them. That is so jarring to newcomers. In my experience with people who I've chatted with who have never played Doom growing up, it takes about an hour to get adjusted to this, but once you are adjusted, in the same way of like a black and white movie, the rest of it's just easy to watch. The rest of it's an easy experience to have. I beg of anyone to give Doom 1 a chance. If you hop on it and you're like, oh my god, I can't look up and down, just give it a chance. Play it for about 20-30 minutes, see how you like it. The first episode in particular and the first level is some of the greatest material ever put in a first-person shooter. John Romero said a quote about the first level that's gone down in game developing history, where he said, "Make the last thing you do with a game creating your first level." And that advice has inspired millions of game developers because you already understand all the mechanics of your game, and so you can establish the perfect starting point as the last thing you do. It's why the first level of Doom 1 and Doom 2 are spectacular introductions. You learn the mechanics, the buttons, the doors, the initial low-tier enemies, the armor system, the secrets, the health and shooting, all in this little comfy, less than a minute long level. And tutorials? Yeah, Doom doesn't need no shitty tutorial. You pop the game on, and you end the first level, you'll understand all the mechanics without anybody telling you anything. By the end of the first episode, you get those bosses who become normal enemies later on, and that's also just a genius way to end off that first part, that first group of levels. John Romero, who basically did everything level-wise for episode 1, it's incredible. It's probably the best work he's ever done as an artist. Doom is just so cool. You have no plot, you get thrown into the action, there's these decorative environments that have gory backdrops with people being punished by demons. The death animations like the Kako demon where the eyeball is popping out, or the Baron of Hell that becomes a pile of intestines. It's so cool. I love the mysterious science fiction bases you fight on as well. It could have just done Hell as their focus, but they said, how about we do Mars, military bases, and then Hell? I feel like every id Software decision they made ended with one of them looking at the other developer and just saying, fuck yeah, that sounds fun. And this goes for the music too, where, oh my god, Mike Gordon for Doom 2016 was a masterclass pick, and you can tell how inspired he was off of the heavy metal vibes of the original Doom. Now, the only problem with the music composed by Bobby Prince is there's, how do I put this without sending Bobby immediately to jail? Well, he stole people's work. And I want to say, Bobby denies ever taking anybody else's work. And there's no proof to what I'm saying. So I'm just going to sound like I'm talking out of my ass and I have nothing for you guys. But just listen to 8 seconds of Doomsgate. Here you go. Okay. So now listen to 8 seconds of DRI's Hooked. I don't need any evidence when I have ears. But you can make up your own decisions on this verdict. There are so many examples of what I'm talking about right now, but this isn't an expose on Bobby Prince. It's just an id Software retrospective, and this is just my opinion that work was stolen. It's not an accusation. It is not something I have any evidence to. It's just my opinion. I still want to say that Bobby Prince is an extremely talented artist, even if a few of his tracks I think are just rip-offs of other people's work from the 80s and 70s heavy metal music scene. Because the soundtrack of Doom became so iconic for a reason. It took the coolest game around about killing demons and said, hey, you know how we can make this better, guys? What? Heavy metal. Fuck yeah, dude. From key searching to killing demons to fighting bosses to using crazy weapons like the BFG, which quite literally stands for big fucking gun, or just use the plasma rifle because that's my personal favorite in the series. Doom is one of the best video game experiences you can have out there, with more enemy and gun variety than some first-person shooters that come out today, some better level design than you see today. Pop it on, activate ultra violence difficulty, turn on auto run, and zoom through every level like you're playing a sweaty multiplayer game, and I promise you'll have one of the best FPS experiences out there because Doom 1 is easily one of the only sinfully S-tier games from me. The aftermath of Doom 1 showed this ripple effect of making a phenomenon. Intel had to ban the game from their company because too many employees were playing it on the job. College campuses had servers crashing because of how many students were using it from shareware. And as I said earlier, it had more downloaded copies than a Windows OS at one point. It sold over 3.5 million copies by 2000. And don't even get me started on how many things it's been ported to. You think it's on every console and every PC out there. Of course it is. It's Doom, it's gotta be. But what about the random shit you got around your house? Doom has been ported to a printer, a toaster, a treadmill, a karaoke machine. Somebody ported Doom into Sonic Mania for whatever reason that was. The old Game & Watch Nintendo accessory pack. The task manager on your computer can run Doom. Your car's key fob. My personal favorite right here with a pregnancy test. And finally, if you have a spare 100 pounds of potatoes, you can run Doom on a giant potato battery. You have no excuses for not playing the original Doom, because I know if none of you can afford a system, you at least got potatoes lying around your house. Tom Hall left in August of 1993 from id Software, and he joined Apogee Games before the release of Doom. id Software didn't stop screwing over Tom Hall though, even after he left, because he asked both the Johns and Adrian if he could use the Wolfenstein IP and make a sequel for it. They gave him permission, and about midway through production on the new Wolfenstein, John Romero and his team said, actually, we don't want you using that IP because it's ours and maybe we'll do something with it later on. So Tom Hall had to pivot and create a game called Rise of the Triad instead. Tom Hall is going to come back around much later in our retrospectives, so keep his name in the back of your mind. But we're almost halfway done now with the golden age of id. Their renaissance of being the most influential FPS creators, and after all the sales that Doom had, we're going to have to bring on some new names being added into the pot of id's creative team. We have a pretty small employee lineup, so that's about to increase just by a little bit. id Software added Sandy Peterson as another level designer during the creation of Doom. We also had Kevin Cloud join as a helper to the art department with Adrian Carmack. Sandy Peterson had to rush some levels for Doom 1 when he first started work because he only had 10 weeks to create 19 missions of the game that was going to drop on December 10th, 1993. So he used a lot of Tom Hall's old level designs from that Doom Bible to speed up the process of making stuff for Episode 2. Episode 3 was a lot of his original ideas that were inspired off of his Lovecraftian obsession. This is going to pop back up again for Quake I, so it's important to note he loved Lovecraft horror, with the giant Cthulhu monsters, the cosmic existential threats, and the never-ending dread feeling of Lovecraft art. These new crew members are going to be vital to id Software's success, especially as id is jumping on the Doom 2 train basically the day after the success of Doom 1. They're going right into the sequel. Honestly, there's very few differences between Doom 2 and Doom 1. There's a double-barrel shotgun now, there's a few new enemies, and there's all new levels, but the level design feels a little bit more gimmicky this time around. It relies on novelties like, oh, here's the level with 7 doors and each one of them has a huge amount of the same enemy behind them, or Barrels O' Fun, where the novelty is just the amount of barrels there are at the beginning of the level that you have to run to avoid. It's novelty. It's kind of this like one-time little gimmick level. Doom 1 had a style to it and atmosphere, and Doom 2 feels more like a party game version of Doom 1. The new enemies like the Pain Elemental that shoots out the fire skullhead guys at you, the Archvile who spawns fire all over you, these people are a pain in the ass. And honestly, I'd argue they're the worst additions as a new enemy type. The Doom franchise has always had this problem, even to this day, of adding new enemies. I feel like that they just throw stuff in and it always slows down the gameplay, or they just give them some annoying ability to spice things up even though it's not needed at all. The Archvile can resurrect bad guys, and the Pain Elemental spawns lost souls, which, I mean, they're the most annoying enemy from the first game already, so you can already tell where I'm going with this. Doom just has a hard time adding new enemies in sequels. Like, sometimes they pull it off, but dear lord, it's rare even in present day. Bad guys aside, Doom 2 does do one thing I think is amazing, and that's where it gets its difficulty from. You don't get the difficulty from fighting hard enemies in small rooms, but instead you get the difficulty of fighting dozens upon dozens of weak enemies all at once in big arenas. To make a fast-paced game, the key isn't making harder enemies that you just have to fight over and over and over again. The key is making tons and tons of weak enemies that you can just use as cannon fodder, but then when there's 100 of them overwhelming you, that's when the game gets hard, because there's so much going on. That's a fast-paced game. There's a reason why Titanfall constantly has fast-paced gameplay, and it's partly due to the crappy AI NPCs that run around the map that you can shoot at when you're not fighting another player. The final level of Doom 2, called Icon of Sin, actually proves my difficulty theory. Doom 2 says, well, there's a boss that doesn't hurt you, but his minions do. You have to fire rockets into his head to kill him before getting overwhelmed by other enemies. That is where the fast-paced gameplay comes from, and Icon of Sin is one of the most fast-paced final boss fights ever put in a video game. The reason why it works being overwhelmed is because most of the enemies are intentionally weak, and they also battle each other on the map too when they accidentally hit each other with different projectiles. It's so chaotic, it's fast-paced, and your goal is just shooting this rocket into the forehead to hit John Romero. And yes, that's actually true. The developers put it there. They thought John Romero would be mad about it, but he actually embraced it and thought it was a really funny idea. I'd argue Doom 2 still feels a little bit more fast-paced and a big fight than Doom 1, because at times you'll have hundreds of enemies coming at you. The fights are just so much bigger, but there is still some dumb shit. There's missions like one called Downtown, where you basically have to do acrobatic platforming to finish the level, and that is just ass on the Doom engine. You have times where a level forces you to unlock a secret to progress to the end, which that's just bad. But they also have good things too, like getting rid of the beginning of episodes of Doom 1 where you would spawn in with a pistol and it would just be obnoxiously difficult. Now, they have it to where it's just one continuous story and your weapons carry over from the start of the game to the end. So you can make those battles bigger and bigger and bigger without it ever being unfair, because you still always have all your weapons. They never had to dial back to make up for the lack of weapons, and that was a really smart idea for Doom 2. Sandy Peterson was in charge of most of these missions and succeeded at making Doom 2 my favorite FPS as a kid, until probably Halo 3 or so. It's not as good of a flow as Doom 1, but because of all the novelty, you have so many memorable moments that you will never forget, and you might even go back and just play a specific level of Doom 2 because of how goofy the idea was. The novelty and gimmicks make for some memorable experiences, even if they aren't as good of a flow. It's a weird game, I'll admit. I love it. It was my favorite FPS until about the age of 10, and I cannot lie to anyone and say that I would give this thing anything under a 9 out of 10. And all of that aside, putting all of my biasness aside, Doom 2 does sometimes feel like an over-glorified expansion pack of Doom 1. The new enemies aren't very good, it has some things that are worse about it, and some things that are better about it, but it's more Doom. And that's all I could ever ask for. We gave thanks to Sandy Peterson for doing the levels, but we didn't talk about the fuck you moment that we have to have with John Romero. We already kind of dissed John Carmack a bit, we gotta diss John Romero too a little bit. Romero and Carmack in their own ways are just kind of dicks. The bluntness here I have for these two is very important, so I'm not being biased to one or the other. Carmack is a dick in his own right for being a walking brain with two legs that doesn't have a lot of empathy, whereas Romero is a creative lead that wasn't used to being a celebrity after Doom 1. That game was huge, it put him on the map, and he did let becoming a celebrity get the best of him. Q1994 and we're working on Doom 2. The whole industry has their eyes on you. Carmack and Romero on the front of all magazines. News outlets are talking about you. Your game is the #1 played thing, and also the most controversial thing due to the level of violence in it. They were being worshipped, and Romero ate it up way more than Carmack. John Carmack agreed that Romero going on press tours and being the face of Doom would be better so he could stay behind advancing their tech at id, while Peterson did all the levels for Doom 2. So while Carmack was working, Romero was out there being a talking head, being a celebrity. You can see where this is going. Romero being looked at as the legendary creator of Doom, getting so much praise, and your whole team is back at home just hard at work on Doom 2. Now I want to take a second and pull out my knowledge on insecurity. I got it all from Modern Warfare 2 lobbies that I was in growing up and being called slurs. I had to do a lot of self-reflection. Pull out that knowledge on insecurity. I want to psychoanalyze Romero for a second. Context is always important. John Romero growing up was not treated well. He's been vocal about this. His dad was an abuser, a gambler, he was an alcoholic, and he got mad at him and his brother often. There's one story in particular where his father left him and his brother in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the night, and they had to walk and find their way home on their own. Nobody should ever have to experience something like that. That goes without saying. I think John Romero, after all that hardship, probably just loved the attention of knowing people were supportive and cared about what he created. If you don't have that growing up, if you're neglected, it can easily feel so intoxicating to hear that praise from people around you, let alone the whole world praising you for an amazing game that you created. I think John Carmack and Romero have their faults, but context is still important, and their pasts are sad in more ways than one. Romero has chilled out a lot over the years, and I even want to just show this sweet strain of messages he had with a Reddit fan named Johnny Rico91. I'm gonna show this here to kind of end off this section on a sweet note. He shows his happiness and his condolences when hearing about this fan and his father who used to bond over Doom when he was younger, and his father had recently passed away. And I think part of this really speaks to me a lot, because when I was younger, Doom, Halo, RuneScape, and plenty of other games were what me and my dad would always play. We used to stay up and play episodes of Doom 1 on LAN co-op with our dial-up internet. It was total trash. And when I hear people say that they had this bonding activity with their dad, it kind of strikes a chord with me. Doom and Doom 2 and Halo were the big ones, though, for me. Those hold a special place in my heart. And that's why Doom 2 is going to hit sinfully S tier for me. It's not as good as Doom 1, but I do not care. I have to have it in S tier. If you put on the newest port of Doom 1 and Doom 2 nowadays, you're going to be greeted by a few different expansions. For the sake of brevity, we are going to speed run through these so we can move on to the next big part of the golden age, and it's going to finish off what id Software did for defining the modern FPS genre. technically the first expansion pack was Episode 4 being added to Doom 1 in 1995, but after that, we have Master Levels of Doom 2. I'll be transparent and say that a lot of these expansions I'm not the biggest fan of. I feel like Master Levels of Doom 2 can start to feel a little bit of what I like to call a clickathon. I call games clickathons where I have to click on every single surface over and over to figure out a way to progress. I do not like clickathons. You waste too much time clicking to find an exit and not enough time just having fun with the game. The levels are obnoxiously big in the middle, and they reminded me of the worst stuff from Doom 2, where it's mazy, asymmetric, non-linear, confusing. You're doing acrobatic platforming, sprinting off ledges to land on some platform that you can't even see because you can't look up and down in the game. And that's just asking a lot from players to know what platforms to sprint onto when you literally can't look up and down. You don't really have the verticality to be able to tell where to sprint. This is Master Levels of Doom. It's not Acrobatics 101. The final boss fight is also so lame because it's just another version of the Icon of Sin final boss from Doom 2, which you can't just reuse a boss fight and expect me to eat that up. Speeding through that timeline, we got Final Doom of June 17th, 1996, which is split up into two massive expansions, one called Plutonia Experiment and the other one called TNT Evolution. Both of these are community-made maps by fans. These expansions were purchased by id Software and released as Final Doom. There's over 30 missions here, and I'm gonna sum it up in a couple of sentences for brevity. I am sorry to all the devs that put way more time into this than what I'm about to say. But there is some fantastic ideas here, especially in spicing up the locations you visit. It's not just Hell, Earth, or Mars. It's like a Pharaoh Egyptian-styled mission, storage compounds, or a prison. That's my favorite part about Final Doom, the design. The maps here are way too big though again. I hate the boss fight to TNT Evolution because it's just Icon of Sin for the third time in a row now. And really the only thing it has going for it is that it has office building and government building environments translated to Doom, which we've never seen something like that before in the OG Doom graphics. It looks great. Like the designs of these two expansions prevail, but everything else does kind of fail for me. The same critiques and positives I said expand into the Plutonia Experiment, except with just one more problem added. This is when the DLCs start to become so unfair that they're only appealing to a smaller than 1% demographic of Doom fans. You will be saving over and over in every level, every minute to make it to the end of your first playthrough. It's annoying to do that, and I hardly recommend playing Final Doom unless you're in that top 1% of Doom fans like myself. But even then, I'd still argue it was annoying to me. I was still annoyed for multiple levels of Final Doom. And Plutonia Experiment does something else wrong because they thought it would be really cute and fun to reuse the Icon of Sin boss fight again, as if I wasn't sick of it after the last 3 freaking times of seeing it. You have to be psychotic to want to see this boss fight 4 times in a row. Did John Romero sit me down and lobotomize me to get me to just clap my hands like a fucking walrus when I see the Icon of Sin? No. It's lame. Here's when things get interesting. So No Rest for the Living released in 2010 on Doom 2 when it was added to the Xbox Arcade. It was made by Nerve Software. It's 9 levels and it's the closest to the original Dooms have ever looked to being just a pure hellscape. It's unfairly hard once again, which is just par for the course for Doom DLCs, but the biggest standout here is just the appearance. The vibrant red, the blood rivers, all this bleeds hell aesthetic. The pure hellscape look of it, and just walking around in these environments is so cool and surreal looking. Sigil and Sigil 2 follow the same format. They were both made by John Romero himself in 2019 and 2023 respectively. They're his fun little side projects he was doing, and to nobody's surprise, I have the exact same feelings about them as No Rest for the Living. Beautiful design, amazing hell look, but they're super hard and probably going to only appeal to a very small group of fans. Now, if you were to step me aside and ask me privately what is the best expansion out of all of these, I'd probably say Sigil and Sigil 2. And maybe I'm being biased because I do like John Romero, but his level designing is almost always unique. And so what can I say? I like it. You can tell he was having fun making this. Our final expansion, which came out exclusively to the Doom 1 plus Doom 2 bundle of 2024, is called Legacy of Rust. This is the only official Doom 2 expansion ever really made. Because all the other ones were made by fans or John Romero on his spare time, Legacy of Rust is made by id Software, Night Dive Studios, and Machine Games, who did Wolfenstein New Order. And it's the closest you will get to a new Doom game with the graphics of the old Doom. None of the other expansions had new demons and new weapons, which this one does. There's new boss fights and around 16 levels. It's the Doom 3 you'd always want with OG graphics, because it has all the new stuff you can do. It's not just new levels or whatever, it's actual assets being added to the game, with just very innovative ideas being added to the original graphics. It's a wonderful cap-off to any Doom player who wants one last hoorah with the original game's look, with all different types of equipment like flamethrowers and all different types of enemies, like whatever the hell these things are called. I don't know. I'm gonna just call them the creature on the front of Dio's Rainbow in the Dark album. That's what they look like, so that's their name to me. First half of Legacy of Rust is actually kind of fantastical. Like, it was just so weird to get my old Doom brain, the cogs and gears working with new content, like puzzles and buttons that do different stuff besides just opening doors. Lots took me a second to get used to. But the biggest thing that holds back Legacy of Rust is that it's intentionally the hardest thing you're ever going to play in Doom. Honestly, you might even just have to go in God mode and be a coward like me and have a fun time killing 100 demons in a single bullet. It's very, very fun to play, but how do you expect me to do this without being in the top 0.001% of Doom players? I God moded it. I have no shame in that. I just wanted to have fun, and I did. It's like the developers intentionally wanted to scar your gamer brain for life if you wanted to play this thing not in God mode. This is the whole last half of the expansion right here. id Software, during all their expansion release dates in the mid-90s, also worked on publishing other games like Heretic and its sequel Hexen. These were made by Raven Software, who became a partner with id way before they became Activision's boy toy, and now they just make Call of Duty maps, so sadly. I cannot believe they ever did this to Raven Software. It is such a shame. They were a wonderful game developer. When they made Heretic and Hexen, John Romero was more focused on helping them out with those projects while being the gaming rock star that he was, rather than helping out with Doom 2 or Quake. And that goes back to what I said earlier. John Carmack hones in on one thing at a time. He's a hard worker on one thing with a small crew who wants to make the technology go so far. But Romero is a creative who just wants to dip his hands into a bunch of different projects at once. So they just weren't on the same wavelength about any of this. He still likes to work, but his influence isn't as noticeable because how he likes to dip his hands into each project little by little. He doesn't want to be stuck doing one thing. Heretic and Hexen 2 all received around 8 out of 10s on Metacritic. Plenty of people appreciated it, and the last one I want to mention before moving on to the next big boy on our id Software timeline is Doom 64. Nobody talks about it. We gotta get it out of the way. Nobody likes talking about Doom 64. It's kind of the type of game that you forget is in your gaming library. You see it once in a blue moon and you're like, I'm gonna get around to that. And then you just end up dying of old age before you ever play it. It's not developed by id Software, so we're not going to talk about it a lot. It's made by the guys who did Darksiders 2, so that's a fun fact for the 15 Darksiders 2 fans out there. Unfortunately, though, I am not a big Doom 64 defender like I am a Darksiders 2 defender. I think it looks kind of cool in terms of the enemies being turned into 3D versions of themselves, but everything is too dark and dreary to the point that the game barely feels like an action game. And I think there's even more to it than that. It's not just the look of the game that's unappealing. Everything is slower, the AI aren't as frequent, the projectiles are really slow, and this was all to make up for the function of that god-awful N64 controller. Well, god-awful for shooters. It was not good for that type of game. It needed to be slower because it was near impossible to play if it wasn't with that controller. But the problems come with if you play it on PC or on any modern system, it just feels too slow because you can move just as fast as you do in Doom 1 and 2, but everything else around you moves at molasses pace. The Doom 64 is a little bit moody and almost feels like the direction that Doom 3 is going to take in about 10 years from now, but it doesn't work nearly as well as it wants to because it's still an action game like Doom 1, or at least it's trying to be. It's not a horror game like Doom 3. It's a game for completionists of Doom, just like a lot of these expansions. It's probably the worst game in the whole series for me personally. If I was to rank it, I'd probably give it a Cacodemon C tier, but I'm not going to rate it because it's not developed by id Software. Now I'll give it Cacodemon tier, who cares, fight the power. The last fourth of it is kind of what redeems it because it's probably just as fast-paced as you'd like it to be, but overall it's a fairly boring game and it doesn't bring a lot new to the table. The level design is not very good, so I think Cacodemon tier is fair. I'm moving on through our timeline. We are leaving behind Doom for a while, like a long while, like around 10 years worth a while. id Software, after Doom 2, wanted to start another new IP, and that IP was gonna shake the world. That IP was Chapter 3, The Failure of Quake. The movie Independence Day came out on the same year that the first Animal was cloned. But fuck all that noise, because the only thing we care about on here is video games, and the most revolutionary game of the year was Quake. Released June 22nd, 1996. Quake had a similar format to Doom, but instead of running and gunning, you're now running around a Lovecraftian universe with castles, and you're gunning down knights and monsters rather than fighting demons on Mars or Hell. Quake was not always like this, though. It wasn't always similar to Doom. We saw Tom Hall get a little tense with id Software when they weren't listening to any of his ideas, and now he's gone. He just left, or, technically got fired. An original founder. MIA. This is the start of the end. The paradoxical accident of Quake destroying friendships while paving a new path for id Software as a company. It isn't the end of id Software's success, but that failure they weren't willing to see that was right in front of their faces is about to hit them. That failure is the fall of their relationships. The hardworking, non-caring Carmack, the celebrity Romero, and Adrian, who often didn't want to get involved with their feuds, nor did any of the other id employees. God forbid you got involved when these two were both arguing. Quake is the climax of their story. It's the end of an era as we inch closer to the end of the Golden Age. John Carmack had a D&D campaign where there was a character who was the most powerful being in the universe, and his name was Quake. id had originally been wanting to make Quake since before Wolfenstein came out. They even teased it after the Commander Keen series was released, saying that their next game was going to be called Quake, The Fight for Justice. Now obviously the subtitle didn't actually happen, but the title Quake did eventually. The biggest hurdle that stood in their way was the tech, because it just wasn't where they wanted it to be to make a fully 3D game. Now we're here though. Quake's gonna happen. We have the tech for it. You have Carmack over here working on a new engine for nearly a whole year until the end of 1995. If Romero's masterpiece was Doom, it is safe to say Quake is Carmack's. He focused on getting the lighting in there, 3D map layouts, better network code so they could evolve the deathmatch elements of Doom 2. Graphically, the game is crazy good looking while also being able to run at fast speeds on a computer that was basically the equivalent of a toaster. They had faster speeds on Quake than most other games available, and Quake was considered the first fully 3D first-person shooter. No more tricks, no more 2.5D guys like Battlezone or Doom or Wolfenstein or Catacombs where it was like 50% 3D, 50% 2D, all this stuff. Descent was another shooter that had 3D environments but also had 2D enemies and projectiles and barely worked on lower class computers. Quake, everything was 3D, even the bullets are 3D, and it ran on a crappy toaster computer that could barely run Descent. Nothing was faked this time around. And I think this is the biggest argument in the retro gaming community about what is 3D and what is not 3D. Even on my old video, I still get the occasional comment that says, no, Doom was 3D. I was wrong in that old Doom video. I thought it was 2D, but it is quite a bit of it is 3D. It just wasn't the full 3D that Quake is. In my limited understanding of the technology, Quake was that first fully 3D first-person shooter. Even if other FPS games had elements of 3D or 3D environments, Quake was the first to be fully 3D. And that's what made it so special technologically. Carmack, being the genius he is, he made the fully 3D engine from the ground up with little help. They hired a couple of new programmers like Michael Abarash and John Cash, but don't let it be misunderstood. Quake's engine is John Carmack's masterpiece of his career. Quake's engine went on to be the reason why games like Call of Duty even got created, which was just a modified version of the Quake 3 engine. Half-Life also used it. So it's not just that John Carmack's masterpiece is impressive. It's part of the reason why some of the best franchises were as good as they were. He wanted to make the best thing ever, and that's where the arguments come in. John Romero wanted to make a fantasy first-person melee-focused RPG game that would have a story, cinematics, melee combat as a main focus, massive levels, and stat-based mechanics. Doom is just Wolfenstein dialed to 11 in a lot of ways. This sounds like something new. John Romero wanted something different from Doom and Wolfenstein, but Carmack, he wanted to perfect what they did with Doom and make another run-and-gun FPS with a focus being on his engine. His engine was going to be the selling point. This all goes back to Tom Hall to me. Carmack didn't believe that a story in a game was necessary, and in fact, he resented it. The rest of id Software was just waiting around patiently for Carmack's engine to be finished and trying to figure out what the design of the game was even going to be, because nobody knew. Nobody was on the same page. Nobody knew what this was going to be. You have both of your head leaders saying completely different things about Quake. The upgrade to the Doom engine, which was originally called id Tech 1, is not surprisingly now called id Tech 2. John Carmack finished id Tech 2. So what do we think's going to happen? The studio slammed the red button and they called an emergency meeting since now we've entered production, but nobody has any idea what's going on at the whole studio. One group of employees was being told by Romero to make an RPG, make level designs and mechanics and ideas that are going to be for an RPG, because that's what we're doing. Another group is being told that they're making a run and gun game, and then they would both tell each other's groups to toss out the work that the other one did because it didn't match their vision. Romero and Carmack made everyone confused about their back and forth arguments about if the game was going to be fully 3D, what ideas were going to pass, what were getting tossed out. They were telling their employees contradictory things, and they didn't agree on anything. They argued about whether or not the game should be delayed because now that the engine's done, they only have 6 months until release. Everybody at this point was just tired. I'm putting myself into the shoes of one of these employees. They were working on map designs, levels, and mechanics that were either getting tossed out, or they found out they wouldn't function in John Carmack's engine, or they're being told a lie by one of their leaders. They couldn't know any of this info, whether it was because their leaders are arguing or because they didn't know how long John Carmack was going to take on the freaking engine. They couldn't predict all this, so there's so much time being spent on things that are just getting tossed out, and that just had to have killed morale in the studio. Some of the maps they couldn't run in John Carmack's engine because they took up too much memory, so they had to add a memory cap that prevented the maps from getting too large, which cut out a lot of the team's work, made people throw out maps that they made, and also made people have to trim down their maps, which created sloppy level design. And sadly, even the infighting extended into the other developers with people like Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud, those artists. They had a whole year worth of Aztec medieval textures. They worked on those for a year, like these Aztec castles, medieval textures, and they were all thrown out by the newer American McGee employee because, quoting him, he said they were too brown. A year worth of work almost being just thrown away. It's so wasted. It's so frustrating. I think about how long it takes me just to make one of these videos. And just imagining that just getting tossed into the trash is terrible. Everyone's tired, and some people wanted more employees to help out with the production, but John Carmack was adamant about keeping the team small, keeping it to 13 employees, so they didn't lose track of what they wanted to do with Quake. But the problem is they already did. Nobody knows what's happening. You've already lost track of what's going on with Quake. You've already lost track of it. The team voted to keep the release date as June 1996. They also voted for what the design of Quake was going to be. They picked a run-and-gun shooter with no RPG mechanics. No melee-focused combat, just a plain old Doom clone, but with fully 3D graphics. They weren't excited to make this thing because of all of the infighting that was going on. They hated that so many of the concepts and the levels were just being tossed out. And as an employee, they just felt beaten and battered, so they just wanted it to be done with. All the things that made Wolfenstein and Doom successful with proportionally long development times and having that fuck yeah mentality about every decision you're making, the things that team resented about working with Apogee and Softdisk with crunch times, meeting deadlines, you're making the game just to finish it. I mean, John Carmack, all of them, they all had become the very thing that they criticized about those original companies that they worked for. You're not making games to explore ideas and to do what's most fun for the player, making it just to finish it. You're embodying crunch time, and you're not accepting new ideas into the video game. And I'll even trash on Romero too. He could have worked harder to be on the same page as Carmack because they were terrible management together. That had to have been just awful working as a normal employee underneath both those guys. And it doesn't help that they were all still bitter at John Romero for taking a celebrity tour while Carmack ran the ship at id Software and carried Doom 2 to its release date. They did all the work with that. John Romero didn't really do a lot. He was just being a big-time celebrity. A lot of unresolved resentment. Romero has never gone on the record to say he didn't like Quake, but he has been on the record multiple times saying that he feels like it's a lot slower than Doom. It wasn't what it should have been, and it was a sluggish game. John Romero just didn't work on Quake as much once they chose to ignore all of his RPG elements to just make a slower version of Doom. He hated all of that. And it did not help how he felt about id Software. It did not help with him pushing away Carmack and Carmack pushing away him, and it did not help his relationship with id Software as a company. John Romero did the entire second episode of levels for Quake I. Sandy Peterson did the fourth episode, Tim Willits, a newer employee, did the entire first episode, and American McGee, another newer developer, did the third episode. And I'm still going to appreciate John Romero's level design because even though he wasn't in love with Quake, or helped out as much as he should have, he still managed to be what was considered the best map in the multiplayer with Abandoned Base. That was created by him. And I think that's just a testament of the talent that Romero can bring even when he doesn't care that much. There's only one other time I can think of where Romero seems to care about Quake I even though people act like he didn't or act like he hated the game. The day of Quake's release, when mastering the game, which means you're making the final copies for distribution, nobody was in the office. I talked about this in the beginning. There was not a soul here. And the only one who was there was John Romero. This is kind of cheesy, but I like to believe this was the day that Romero realized he just wasn't going to stay at id. You enter the building, nobody's there. It's the complete opposite as it was before Doom's release. Nobody wanted to be there anymore. And nobody wanted to work on this thing because they weren't passionate about it. John Romero was there to finish off this mastering. He did this for every single id game, but this was the first time that he entered the office and nobody was there, which gives these feelings of just animosity that the team felt as the development wrapped up. I think it hammered home the idea that id was broken. The original idea for Quake was brought up by Romero, and he used John Carmack's D&D world as a frame of reference for how they would make it. That's a friendship. I think they were both friends. I just think they're also guys who didn't know how to express their feelings and their grievances to one another in a healthy way. It led to a lot of internalized resentment and hatred that began to expose itself by the end of Quake's production. It backfired on everyone, including all the employees, all because they didn't know how to express how they felt to one another. Romero wanted an ambitious story RPG, a new game that was different from Doom. Carmack wanted the smoothest experience possible with his engine at the core of it. John Romero never worked as hard as Carmack. That couldn't even be argued. I think he would admit to that. That's probably half the reason why the team sided with Carmack when choosing Quake as a run-and-gun game rather than an RPG. They know that deep down, John Carmack is like irreplaceable as a programmer. He's literally a genius. But John Romero's work, he had just as much to show for it as Carmack did. His work shined just as much as Carmack's, even if he doesn't work as hard as him. That's a partnership that's capable of making a perfect game. Chapter 4. The Success of Quake. As gamers, we just want to know if Quake I is good. And ironically enough, Quake I was critically acclaimed even with all the hate the studio had for it. I've played Quake I 6 times all the way through. My dad originally tried to get me to play it when I was a kid. I didn't like it. I tried it again in around 2020-ish, and I thought it was a little bit more like a boring Doom. Like, it wasn't as good as Doom was. And then I tried it again. And then again. And then again. And I've come to realize that the more I learn about Quake's development, the more I like it. It's not the best thing ever. It's not as good as Doom, but the fact this good game came out of the development hell and it was the last game made in collaboration from John Romero and Carmack, it makes me sad. But it is a bittersweet sadness because it's a great game. When you're going down the hallways of Quake I, there's this monochromatic color this dreary, disgusting look to everything. And then when you tag along the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack done by Trent Reznor, there's just such an ambiance to it. It feels dreadful. The wind sounds you can hear with the flow of water sound effects around you. You can also swim in that water. And that's something that neither Wolfenstein or Doom accomplished. The ambiance. I don't think those games want to look or feel as ominous as Quake does, with those empty castle hallways that have more in common with a horror game than they do an action game. It's hard to describe because I love the look of it, but it is weird in contrast to the fast-paced shoot-'em-up gameplay. It doesn't feel natural, like it doesn't match with how the game should look. Like, imagine if you made a platformer as fast-paced as Super Mario Galaxy, but then made it look like Killzone 2. It does not mesh. And that's why the ambiance of Quake feels like it almost should be in a horror game and not an action game. I like the look, but it feels out of place. You have brown stone walls, the brown dirty religious temples, and monsters that look like they just got done with battle before seeing you. And then you have those gross sound effects that plague the whole soundtrack, and it's in a very complimentary way because Trent Reznor knows exactly what he's doing here. Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails were also loved by the Quake staff so much that when you look at the nail guns ammo packs, it literally says NIN on them. I wonder what NIN stands for. These skinny hallways and the small rooms that make it feel less like a sandbox and more like this tightly paced shooter, but with all the same exact looking rooms, the same exact looking hallways, which can just be really gross and unappealing a lot of the time. My problems really come from that it's fast paced, it has speed to it, but the weapons feel so much weaker in Quake than they do in Doom. The shotgun can take up to 4 shells just to kill one standard minion, not even on hard difficulty, by the way. I'm talking about normal or easy mode. They don't have a consistent feel to them to the amount of shots it takes to drop enemies. And some bad guys, even like the Shambler or the Vor, feel like bullet sponges. Like they just take bullets like no tomorrow. They're not as fun to fight with these weak guns, and then the ambiance doesn't match that run and gun gameplay, so it's just kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of things that are okay on their own, but all meshed together aren't the best. The core gameplay loop is still there, and it's still enjoyable because they've been doing the core gameplay loop for Quake for the last 2 franchises that they've done. It just has hiccups to it. Some of the stuff works for me that makes the gameplay slower, and then some of it doesn't. Lots of fun gameplay, but it's going to be surrounded by flaws. One that's most notable to me is the locations. If you showed me any level to Quake, I have no idea what level it's supposed to be, and I've played the game 6 times. And that's because most of the rooms look exactly the same. You're either in a brown computer room, a brown stone room, or a brown temple room. There is no, these are your 3 environments, and they all look identical with just a couple of different assets. That environment design works for a game like Amnesia, where you're supposed to be shitting your pants half the time because you don't even know where you're going. But it doesn't work in a fast-paced shooter like Quake because you're going to be backtracking and figuring out which way to go while not fighting any enemies at all. It really slows down the pace. One of the big reasons that Quake is so beloved, though, is the massive step forward it did for deathmatch. Quake's gameplay was so revolutionary, and not just due to the fully 3D engine or the fun multiplayer, but also due to the controls. The controls that were completely changed in deathmatch for a lot of people. Quake, you weren't forced to only look left and right like you were in Doom. You had free aiming where you could also look up and down. Back in the 90s, when games used free aiming, you would use the arrow keys to look around. I used to do this in Doom all the time whenever I would look left and right. But games like Marathon and Terminator Future Shock that have free aiming as well allowed you to use the mouse, which that was actually not as common as you'd probably think in the 90s. Quake popularized the usage of the mouse to look around in first person, and lucky for the company, nobody dropped Quake because of the mouse system. Everybody had to get used to it, most people loved it, and it made Quake one of the very first popular games to be in the esports scene. Apex Legends, Valorant, Counter-Strike, all these games eat up the esports scene nowadays, but Quake was an OG. One of those original esports tournaments in 1997 had a prize of John Carmack's Ferrari. You could win a Ferrari in 1997 at an esports tournament, and a prize like that for whoever won at a silly little Quake tournament had everybody's heads turning, and people started to realize that video games were becoming a bigger deal. They weren't just a silly pastime for kids anymore. There was money to be made in this industry. It was competitive. It was lucrative. Speaking of other things that Quake did that were huge, you know WASD being used as the movement in PC games? It's literally the movement in every PC game ever nowadays. That started from a pro player named Dennis Fong, who went to Quake tournaments and he used WASD for movement. A lot of people mimicked this behavior, and now the rest is history. The terms like frag or rocket jumping were founded in Quake, and if you've ever played Overwatch, Team Fortress 2, or any game with rocket jumping, you know what that is. I haven't even touched on everything that Quake revolutionized, but these are just the most important things to me. The WASD movement, the free aim mouse look popularization, the fully 3D environments, the beginning of the arena shooter genre being made, the start of the term first-person shooter rather than Doom clone, making it accessible to people of all computers and not just highly expensive ones, the lighting, the id Tech engine that was used in some of the most iconic franchises ever. Quake is probably going to be, for a very long time, the most influential game that I will ever talk about on this channel. How does one of the most influential games ever get built off the backs of a bunch of developers who hated working on it? That's why I gain more respect for it every single time I play it, even if I have so many issues with it. It's why the biggest thing about Quake to me isn't really even the quality of Quake, it is John Carmack's engine. It's the most impressive thing he's ever made in this entire timeline of id Software. Romero has used words like oppressive to describe the id Software environment in the last few months of development for Quake. Romero during these oppressive months was seen as trying to be the fun guy. He would come in playing 9 Inch Nails, he wanted to be a part of friend groups at work, he wanted to be happy working together, but Carmack never saw any of that as a good influence for the crew. John Romero was always showing up late, he was playing music, he was trying to make the workplace more of a friendship hangout the way it used to be with Doom, he wanted to play deathmatch with people around the office, but Carmack hated it. And during the crunch time of those last few months, working 7 days a week until release, he always viewed this mentality as a bad influence for the id employees. So John started feeling nostalgic for old friends, or just missing the old workplace. John called up Tom Hall. John talked with him on the phone and brought up the possibility of creating a new game studio. This kind of makes sense because John would reach out to Tom Hall considering he wanted to do more story stuff, more RPG directions, and that matched up with what Tom Hall wanted to do as a game designer with his Doom Bible being rejected back in 1993. They both together on the phone planned on creating a company called Eon Storm, but Romero had to wait until Quake was done shipping before he could go do that. They both planned together making a studio called Eon Storm, but Romero had to wait until Quake was done shipping before he could change focus to being on that. Quake I finally came out, and right after release, over half of the 13 employees currently working at id Software left the studio. John Romero was included in this half of employees, and he was asked to resign by id due to him helping out Raven Software on Heretic and Hexen, and not helping out as much on Quake. John Carmack tried to accuse him of abandoning shifts to help out with other games, which, I'll be honest, this is likely true. He accused him of being bad for the company, which that's, you can think however you want about that. But now, Romero was already planning on leaving to go make Eon Storm with Tom Hall anyway, so he just said fine. He walked out the door, and he never came back. He was put in the decision where he was either going to be fired or had to just go. So he took the high road, and id Software will never have the creative Romero in their hands ever again. They would still have the most valuable player, though, with their technical genius, John Carmack, and they still have their artist, Adrian Carmack. 2 out of the 4 founders are now gone. John Carmack became the driving leader for id Software, and John Romero began work with Tom Hall on 4 different video games at once. I only want to talk about 2 of these very briefly. Dankatana is one of those games. It kind of had this old school action game vibe to it, but it had also an over-reliance on Romero's celebrity life. Like, they were advertising the game off of John Romero's name, which was starting to wear thin, especially now that him and John Carmack were separated and not working together anymore. Compare it to the Beatles. Paul McCartney and John Lennon were never going to be as popular as they were when they were in the Beatles together. John Romero's fame was already dwindling, but it came to a halt when the first Daikatana advertisement dropped, and all the poster said was this: John Romero is about to make you his bitch. Suck it down. You can see why this didn't go over well. The overinflated ego was not flattering to anyone. John Romero has said that when the ad was first presented to him, he didn't really know what to think of it. He knew it was kind of risky, and the fact that he did approve it is something that he is apologetic about. He doesn't think it should have ever really gone through. The funny thing about this is, though, is that the ad for Daikatana is not the reason it wasn't sold. It just wasn't a very good game, so it didn't sell a lot. There's a very, very small cult following for Daikatana, and not many people really care for it. You can still find it on Steam. It's still on a bunch of platforms, but all the reviews are always mixed. People don't really care for this game. You're starting to see that Beatles partnership really meant something, and that these two both separately just don't work as well as they did together. The next game I want to mention from Eon Storm is Deus Ex, which this has actually been slowly becoming one of my favorite RPGs. It's slower, there's a lot of ways to finish every mission, and it's extremely unique. I want to preface me saying this is one of my favorite RPGs by saying it is very, very flawed on a gameplay level. It's not technically impressive at all, and it doesn't have the smoothness of an engine that was made by John Carmack with Doom or Quake or whatever, but the thing Deus Ex does have is that it's brilliant with everything else outside of the gameplay. It's got fantastic writing, great dialogue options, great RPG mechanics. It's very similar to the same vein as Fallout New Vegas or Witcher 3. The gameplay is not very impressive to both those games, but those games are considered some of the greatest of all time because of their RPG elements. They excel in other areas. Sandy Peterson also left with over half the staff due to that toxic work environment. I know also one in particular person that people didn't like was Tim Willits, who this is one of the level designers, which we're going to get a little bit more into him later, but I know plenty of people couldn't stand him or John Carmack. They had a lot of resentment held against them during productions. But let's turn on auto run and race through the Quake 1 expansions so we can move on to Quake 2. The remaster of Quake 1 contains all of these expansions, with the first one being Scourge of Armagon. I hate that I'm about to do an immediate flip, but Armagon is everything I wanted from Quake's main story levels. It's probably my favorite expansion out of all of the Quake 1 DLCs, even if there's a disappointing final boss fight that lasts, I'm not joking, probably about 10 seconds. You could fly through this fight. It's like nothing. It's, it's like it's so weak, it's so bad, but the rest of the expansion is fantastic. It has more of that Quake 2 aesthetic, which is more sci-fi military bases being front and center rather than the medieval castles. They also brought in the Thunderbolt hammer, the Thor Mjolnir hammer. That was the original melee concept for the first draft of Quake 1. They tossed all that out before the release date. They brought it back for that first expansion pack, and the melee weapon just feels right in Quake. You can slam it down and kill 5 enemies around you with one giant thing of lightning across the ground. The second expansion is called Dissolution of Eternity, and it takes tons of hard work and dedication to get through it, in the same way as Doom DLCs. It's back-breakingly hard. It can be very mazy, too, with its level design sometimes, so I definitely don't care for it as much as Armagon, but the final boss fight is a treat, and it's much better than that first expansion's disappointing one. You legit fight a flying fucking dragon. It's probably the coolest thing that happens in the entirety of Quake 1. This brings back that classic id Software mentality of somebody looking at another developer and saying, fuck yeah, let's put a dragon in the game. That'll be cool as hell. And everyone just rolled with it. I love this thing. One of the best boss fights in id Software history. This thing fucking rules. Sorry, I just became like a 90s bro talking about Quake 1. But I mean, I think that's kind of fitting. 1996. We gotta become a punk 90s skateboarder watching Jackass with my plasma rifle in hand. Dimension of the Past and Machine are the last 2 expansions, and they are just kinda there. They just kind of exist, and if you like Quake 1 a lot, then I can recommend them, but they're not must-play expansion packs. In fact, throughout all of id Software's history, there is only 3 expansion packs I would say are must-plays, and the first one is Scourge of Armagon. We're about to move on to the second one very soon, and then there's going to be a third one that's around the mid-2000s. id Software did not make a lot of amazing DLCs, but Scourge was one of them. So now that the DLCs are done, Where does Quake 1 rank for me? Quake 1 is lean and mean, but it also has a lot of the same environments, some clickathon mazy areas, some bullet sponges for enemies, and it doesn't feel as fun to fight stuff as their predecessor. It's held up by two things. One is that hallway fast core gameplay loop. The other one is its revolutionary status in the industry, and that standout multiplayer that legit made esports the modern phenomenon it is today. You don't have any of that without Quake. So from a technical standpoint and from an influential standpoint, Quake is easily sinfully S tier. But when we factor in me personally, what I like in the quality, I would say it's an arch-vile A tier. I obviously really liked the game for how much I played it. If I gave it anything below A tier, I'd just be lying. I played the freaking thing 6 times. But the development story behind it does make me a little bit biased with sympathy towards id Software, and the development hell they went through to get this thing out there, that does give the game a little bit more respect considering how big it is for how much development hell it went through. It's tough, because I enjoy Quake more than Wolfenstein 3D, so it has to be higher than Wolfenstein's B tier. But I don't enjoy it as much as Doom. Quake 1 is in the bag now, so we're moving on to just next year in 1997, where we're starting to work on Quake 2. Chapter 5. This isn't the Quake that I used to know. Alright everybody, get your backpacks, pick yourselves up by your bootstraps, and then get back to doing 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, as American McGee would say about this toxic work environment. This is terrible working conditions, but we're not even going to bother talking too much about it. We've now replaced all the employees who left due to the terrible working conditions, and we got the number back up to 13 people as John Carmack would want. That number 13 he loved. It meant that the team was small, just like he always liked. They needed bigger funding this time to do a new game that was supposed to be a fully original IP because nobody liked working on Quake 1, so they were about to just throw that whole franchise away and start anew. To get more funding, they partnered with Activision, who owned about 49% of their stock, and they kept that company intentionally below 1%, so they didn't have majority say of what the company can do. They weren't going to call the shots for them, so they were like, you're staying at 49%. We all still own the company. Kevin Cloud has been promoted to a founder, Adrian Carmack and John Carmack are still in positions of leadership, and now they have the funding they need. They have the backbone, that safety net, so they can just do whatever they want. We now have 5 level designers, with Tim Willits, who's going to become a more controversial figure in this story, American McGee from Quake 1, and newcomers like Janelle Jacques, Brandon James, and Christian Antkow. Brian Hook is a new programmer, and John Steed is a new player who got added to the art department. They were going to do an original IP, and then they realized how many copies Quake 1 sold, and they said, well, we're stuck with Quake, I guess. It's going to be polarizing for some people to hear this, but I love Quake 2. It's my favorite Quake game. A little prologue to me actually explaining why it's my favorite Quake game by saying that this is not at all really a Quake 1 sequel. They only added Quake 2 as a title for the sake of sales. When looking at this gameplay, just look at this. You can clearly tell there is not a lick of a connection to the tone, the style, the world, or the atmosphere of Quake 1. You have Rob Zombie doing the theme now, you have the science fiction basis for every level, you have all these enemies that don't look like anything out of the Lovecraft vibe of Quake 1. The way it looks, the way it feels, it's not a Quake sequel, and it's kind of garbage at being a sequel to Quake. But in terms of my own personal enjoyment, and where the franchise is going to go, I think it's the best Quake game out there. Quake 2 is not nearly as tech revolutionary as Quake 1 or Doom. Even John Carmack admits to this. His quote about it is this: "There's nothing that's like a gee whiz, this is an incredibly unbelievable feature, but it improves upon everything Quake 1 did, guys." And he's right. It's better, it's easier to navigate, but it also just isn't Quake, at least not in the way you expect. Quake 2 is a science fiction direction that's going to stick around in Quake 3 and Quake 4, and we will never see anything like the look of Quake 1 ever again. Quake 2 also brings back the openness and the massive battles of Doom 1 and Doom 2. They strip away the hallway battles of Quake 1, and they have outside areas with 10 to 15 enemies fighting you at once. It makes it feel like so much more of an interactive experience. I love it. For better and for worse, Quake 2 feels like a mashup of the Quake movement with the Doom universe. That's kind of weird for me to say, but I think I'm onto something with it, because the intro of the levels feel a lot like the Doom transition screen. the dropping of all the ambiance from Quake 1 in exchange of crazy action, goofy enemies that have over-the-top animations, that all feels more like Doom. But we still got the Quake weapons, we still have the fast movement of Quake, and the multiplayer focus, which makes it feel like a mishmash between the two franchises. I guess the best way I could say this is if Quake 1 and Doom had a baby, it would be Quake 2. They even brought back heavy metal music instead of the ambiance of Quake 1, and they even brought back the BFG from Doom. They legit just looked at the audience and said, hey, we're going to make a Doom game and not call it Doom. Here's the BFG again, guys. There you go, have fun. It has zero the identity of Quake 1, but they did confidently make a great sci-fi action shooter. The bad guys of Quake 2 are called the Strogg, and I love the Strogg design. It's like this very mechanical, very disgusting, very mutated human and flesh and machine mixed together. This is why you see all this science fiction stuff and the weapons expanded upon in Quake 3. And even Quake 4, with the Strogg and the military bases all feeling very similar to Quake 2, and that flesh and machine design coming in strong in Quake 4. On a personal anecdote, I think that the railgun in the Quake series might be my favorite weapon that id Software has ever produced. It's powerful, it's a hip-firing sniper rifle, it's an insta-kill, and I love it. If you have good aim, you will destroy with this thing. Some people think Quake 2 is hard to figure out where you're going, but I have never found it to be confusing. The puzzles never feel like clickathons to me. You usually just destroy generators, activate computers, or link buttons, and it's just simple objectives, which is good for a game where the main objective is just going to be shoot Strogg in the face. So you can't give me anything too complicated, or else I'm just going to be confused. The stuff in Quake 2 is easy to figure out. And for a game like Quake or Doom, that's the way it should be. Quake 3 is the fastest id Software game ever created. All the maps are designed for the speed, they complement it, whereas Quake 2 and Quake 1 feel more like they're experimenting with what they can do in deathmatch environments, rather than complementing the speed of the game with the environments. All I can say is that Quake 3 is a shitload faster than the first two. I think one of the reasons why I prefer Quake 2 over Quake 3 is because I'm more of an entire experience guy, rather than a solely multiplayer person. And that's probably why I prefer Quake 2 over all the others. That is immediately going to be sinfully S tier for me. I get why some Quake fans don't care for Quake 2, and I understand that its multiplayer is not as revolutionary or as good as Quake 3, but personally, it hits a perfect spot for me where every part of the game I enjoy. I like every section of it, and I think the campaign in particular is fantastic. It reeled me in from start to finish, and that even expands into the expansion packs in one of the only examples in id Software history, because we all know that they're not very good with expansions, but there is one in Quake 2 that absolutely rocks, but it also wasn't added to the game until about 20 years after release. Quake 2 released on December 9th of 1997, just one day before the anniversary of Doom 1. And after its release, American McGee, who was responsible for all the Unit 2 and Unit 5 missions. These are basically episodes, so Episode 2 and Episode 5 missions, and most of the deathmatch maps. But after the release, McGee was pulled into an office by Adrian Carmack, Kevin Cloud, and John Carmack, where he was told that he wasn't bringing enough to the table and they were going to have to fire him. American McGee has kind of elaborated on this in the future because he didn't really understand why he was being fired, because he brought a lot of the deathmatch maps to the table and he did 2 full episodes worth of missions. I know it's kind of theorized that somebody at the job wanted him gone. Tim Willits, who a lot of people had issues with, have seen him as the main suspect. Some have theorized that due to his political views, some people reported it and got him fired because American McGee had very strong political beliefs. Either way, it worked out a little bit for American McGee because he went on to be the creative director of the cult classic Alice Madness Returns for EA. This is not a huge, massive selling game like Quake or Doom, but this game is very impressive, and so he did get something out of leaving id Software. He also does not like the toxic environment. He hated the crunch time. He's been pretty vocal about this. He can take his backpack and go home because he doesn't have to work 7 days a week, 18 hours a day anymore. I would say that's a win for him, to be honest. Further evidence also supports that Tim Willits, the level designer, was hated amongst the staff. Sandy Peterson refuses to even say his name in a public scenario. He's been caught lying about employees multiple times, and he's been caught taking credit on things that he never actually made, stuff that the fans made that he's like, no, I made all that. And like, he'll take all the credit of something that he did not do on his own. When you pull up his credits on Wikipedia, they are stunning. He was the studio director of Doom 2016, he was an early designer for id Software, and now he is the CCO of Saber Interactive, who made Space Marine 2. But I'm not going to ignore a lot of the allegations against Tim Willits as a guy, because a lot of people say he would throw you underneath the bus just to get the chance to be above you and prop himself higher up on the career ladder. I'm not saying any of this is true, but this is based on a lot of the allegations against him. I don't know him personally, but the look of being caught in so many lies, the look of being in interviews and relentlessly bashing your coworkers, John Romero, and everyone that you've ever worked with, and just the look of just being a bitch is not a good one to have. It's not a good look. Expansions, and more expansions. Quake 2 is no exception to this rule. We have 3 expansions that we got to speed through before we're moving on to 1998. 97 had Quake 2 and Hexen 2. But we also got all these expansions that we got to go through after the release. We got 2 DLCs in 1998 for Quake 2, one called Ground Reckoning and the other one called Ground Zero. The DLC known as Ground Zero released on September 11th. So it looks like that The Simpsons was not the only thing that predicted 9/11, because that has got to be one of the most poorly aged titles for anything I've ever heard. How do you release a game called Ground Zero on September 11th? No, you can't do that. Ground Zero and Reckoning are fun, sweet packs to have, though. They add loads of places to go to, like ships, swamps, and even the freaking moon. You can see the American flag out there on the moon. That is awesome. It's fairly short, but with Reckoning being 6 missions and Zero being 5, they're massive, the environments are varied, the boss fights, especially in Zero, are a great send-off. And there's nothing I would necessarily ride home about as being the spectacular thing like the first DLC of Quake I or the 3rd expansion for Quake 2, which we're going to get into in just a sec, but I think these are both still fun packs to dive into. You notice one of my biggest complaints about expansion packs, especially the Doom 2 ones, is that they were very long and a lot of the missions were boring filler, way too big, way too complicated. These are short packs, which means they probably had a lot of cut levels, but that's kind of a good thing because that means you only get the best stuff. You get 6 missions and then another DLC which is 5 missions, and all of the levels are fun. The 3rd and last Quake 2 expansion, Call of the Machine. It was released in 2023 with the re-release of Quake 2, and it's probably the best thing Quake 2 has to offer. It's my favorite id Software expansion ever made, even though it came out nearly 25 years after the original game. And funny enough, for being my favorite id Software expansion, it's not even made by id. Nobody's ever heard me talk about New Colossus or New Order, the Machine Games Wolfenstein titles, but I am not the biggest fan of them. But I preface that because Machine Games, they've been killing it recently with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and then in 2023 they were the ones who created Call of the Machine. Bangers, like great stuff that they like, that is more impressive than both of those Wolfenstein games to me. The only thing I've ever heard people complain about from Call of the Machine is that the final boss just kind of sucks, and that's because it's a bunch of old Quake 1 enemies like the Shambler that you have to fight with. I normally would hate something like this, but like we talked about earlier, Quake 2 has none of the identity of Quake 1. And I think that this final bit of Quake 2 adds a little bit of closure for a lot of Quake 1 fans who needed some more connective tissue to the original game. If you were a fan of Quake 1 and you played Call of the Machine, and you didn't really care for how Quake 2 wasn't connected at all to the original, you probably like the ending of this. You probably like that they added in the enemies from Quake 1. One of my biggest pet peeves with companies is when they ignore an entry in a franchise. Like you'll see in interviews of studio heads saying, yeah, that movie or game just doesn't exist because it's so bad and the fan base didn't like it, so we're just going to ignore it existed. That mentality is just so gross to me. Somebody made that game. Somebody made that movie. And yeah, it might be bad, but I prefer that you elevate that art rather than just say, yeah, the video game's bad, it should just go to hell. If you're a Star Wars fan out there, think about Clone Wars. The universe elevates the prequel trilogy. Could you imagine if when Clone Wars dropped, they just said, yeah, all the prequels are actually retcon, they just don't exist, people didn't like them, this is the new thing. They instead said, hey, that prequel trilogy, they have problems there. So what we're going to do is we're going to elevate that art. We're going to work on trying to improve these things. We're going to try to help it carry it up there with us. And to compare this back to id Software, they do this with Doom 2016 when they elevate Doom 1 and Doom 2 by having old areas from the original games be accessible in their missions via secrets. It's like paying respect to the old material, whether it's good or bad, and making it work with the sequels or even in the reboot. You can't just ignore an entire movie or a game just because it's bad. And that's exactly what id did for years regarding Quake I. They threw it in the trash, they never did anything with it, they said, we didn't have a fun time making it, so now it just doesn't exist. They ignored the setting, the atmosphere, the ambiance, everything. So I appreciate the idea that Call of the Machine's ending is trying to come full circle and bring in some older enemies from Quake I and show some respect to it. Elevate it. Connect it. Call of the Machine also has a hub world style beginning where you get to pick which mission you want to start with. This reminds me a lot of Mario and Princess Peach's castle, but instead of jumping into paintings, you're going to drop in like an orbital drop shock trooper in every intro for each operation, and I love the Halo 3 ODST vibes I get from this. I don't know if it's actually inspired off of Halo 3 ODST, but I'm all here for it. I love that game, so we're good with that. There's cutscenes for almost every part of the DLC, which is similar to the base game. And after beating the mission, you go back to the hub world, and that creates this nice interconnectivity between all the missions. You move on to the next operation, and once you've beaten all of them, you unlock a teleporter in the middle of the hub world that sends you to the final boss. It's such a unique format, it gives you more choice, it gives you more freedom, it feels inspired. I might even prefer this over the base game, and I already love that thing. My biggest gripe with so many expansions is they often don't do anything that's not expected. They just give you the same weapons, the same level designs, the same textures, the same bosses, or bad guys. An expansion shouldn't go as far as a sequel does, but it should take everything that made the base game great and find new ways to make it even more exciting by using what people liked about the base game and adding new assets on top of that. Think Shadow of the Erdtree, think Phantom Liberty, or think Call of the Machine. Call of the Machine is like balls to the walls action with fighting like 50 enemies at once sometimes, but yet it never feels that difficult. It's not like the frustrating bullshit that you deal with from the Doom expansions. This is the most consistent quality DLC, even if it wasn't made by id. Jump into it because you're not only going to be starting a full new campaign, you're also going to be starting a campaign that is better than the base game. Quake II, and especially Call of the Machine, you surpassed every expectation I could have ever had. The thing I was ruminating over in regards to Quake 3 so much was why it was multiplayer exclusive. And some people might argue there is a story mode that you can do where you play matches against NPCs, but it's basically just a multiplayer game. It's really just like a non-existent story, and you're kind of stretching it by saying it's a story mode. That question that kept on popping into my head doesn't really have a very interesting answer. id Software saw the success of the multiplayer of Quake I and Quake II. They saw more multiplayer games popping up, with the most influential being Team Fortress 1, which also released in 1999, and id Software just believed that going full multiplayer was going to be the best thing to do for the franchise. It also got leaked to the public in 1999 via a hardware-playable version of Quake 3 that featured some of the maps and every cut weapon in the game. This test leak for Quake 3 meant that people knew about the game. Some people had even played the game, like a beta version of it, months before the release date. If you were a fan of Quake 1 and even 2, don't you think if you went online and saw a leaked version of Quake 3 and it was only going to be multiplayer without a dedicated story, don't you think there might have been a little bit of pushback? Yeah, I think so too. I think some people were pretty skeptical over this. It's not like nowadays where every vocal minority fan base on the internet just screams to the heavens on Twitter about the most minuscule, unimportant shit, and people think it's important because this small group of people is just screaming about it. That's probably not how it was, but I could imagine that people in the fan base were probably pretty skeptical over what the game was going to be like. There would be people that were starting to defend it as this brilliant multiplayer shooter, and then others stating that they hate the tossing of the single-player campaign. This exact thing didn't even just happen amongst fans, it happened internally at id Software. There were lots of people that weren't on the same page, many people disagreed with the direction of multiplayer only, but John Carmack and the leaders were dedicated to this change. Quake III, even with all the disagreement, is often looked at as the pioneer of the arena shooter genre, which technically started as early as Doom, but it wasn't perfected and popularized until the time of Quake III. The funny thing is about thinking this, and thinking Quake 3 started it all, it was beaten by exactly 1 month by the first game to popularize arena shooters. That was Unreal Tournament, made by Epic Games. The Quake 3 versus Unreal Tournament argument is not something I plan on touching. I did not play enough of either one of these games to care about that argument. But I am here to talk about some video games. Quake 3 does something right above everything else, above every other id Software game, and it's the reason why it's the final title that we see on this timeline in the Golden Age. Id perfected movement. It is the fastest game they've ever created, it's the fastest Quake game, and the speed of Quake 3 is the core of everything. It's honestly one of the fastest shooters that I have ever played. This is a good and a bad thing, because from a design standpoint, bunny hopping, rocket jumping, and strafing are all hard to learn techniques that make it super difficult to kill in multiplayer, and this is even harder nowadays. As you could imagine, there's not too many Quake 3 players out there that haven't mastered these abilities. And that's a good thing that the abilities are available, but the bad thing is that that small group of players are the only people on Quake 3 now. They've learned all the maps, they know all the techniques, they've mastered the game. There's currently less than 100 players playing Quake 3 right now, and all those fans, they're a freaking cult. What's the definition of a cult? A system of religious veneration or devotion to a public figure or an object. The object in this case is Quake 3. This is a group of people who have a simple devotion to Quake 3, unlike any multiplayer game ever. If you clicked on the typical Quake 3 daily player, I am not joking, they probably average around 5,000 hours on this freaking thing. That is nearly 2/3 of a year dedicated to one game. This devout fan base exists because Quake 3 is unmatched in speed, it's unmatched in subtle movement that can make you go from being a good player to the best player with all of those little techniques I mentioned earlier, and even the weapon variety from the splash damage of rocket launchers to the best iteration of the railgun out there. Still my favorite weapon by id. Thank you for this. The weapons are on point. I can see why these people have stayed on it for over 20 years. It's the chaotic, fun-ass experience, but because of that, the devout fan base have stuck with it for so long, and if you're a new fan, if you download Quake 3 right now, you're gonna go 0-30 every match until you have people rocket jumping around your house and treating you like shit, shooting you with rockets in your sleep. Imagine if you were playing a competitive game like Counter-Strike, or Valorant, or really any competitive shooter, but the entire player base was the top 1%. It was the people who have stuck with it and nobody else. That's who you fought the first time you got on competitive. It would be brutal. It would not just be challenging. It would be basically throwing yourself into a den of lions and saying, learn how to fight these people. And some people might be into that sort of thing, but there's only so far I can get beaten the shit out of before it turns me off. Quake 3 is looked at with Unreal Tournament as being the foundation of the arena shooter genre. And if there was 2 reasons why Quake 3 is so unbelievably loved by the fan base, it's because at the time, there was not a multiplayer game that was as fast-paced as it. So the speed is the first thing. And the second reason is just the guns and that subtle movement. Those subtle things you can do to master the game. And when making an FPS, the 2 most important mechanics are movement and weapons. And Quake 3 nail-gunned both of these to the wall. They even added more guns and more features into the Team Arena expansion, but that doesn't get played nearly as much by people. It's just worth noting. Man, oh man, Quake 3, I love it and I hate it. It's like an abusive partner. I love the idea of being with Quake 3. It seems like it would be lovely, but every time I give Quake 3 a chance, I get pummeled into the ground. If you want to give it a go, give Quake 3 a chance, but I recommend you do it on Quake Live. Quake Live is a 2010 released free-to-play browser game. It's an updated and slightly altered version of Quake 3 with modern systems. Eventually it got sold as a retail copy in 2015. Quake Live does have a higher player base than 3, therefore there's less hardcore players on it. Quake Live only makes some minor changes to some of the weapon damages. A couple of weapons were added, some of the maps are slightly altered, but it's all just minor differences. Overall, if you're only playing Quake 3 for less than 100 hours, play Quake Live. I recommend Quake Live over Quake 3, just because it's a little easier to get into as a newcomer. All the hard mechanics are still there. If you just want to get a little taste of how hard the mechanics can be to master, just go into the tutorial for Quake Live right now. I bet money it will take you 5 hours to finish that tutorial. Quake Live also boasts a highly active modding community with a great Steam Workshop page, which makes it go above and beyond to me. I know technically Quake Live is from 2010, but I wanted to give it a recommendation here since it's basically just a remastered Quake 3. Give them both a shot, choose which one you like more, but for me, it's Quake Live. I'm going to give Quake Live Sinfully S tier, and I'm going to give Quake 3 Archvile A tier. And yes, I am giving Quake 3 a slightly lower score just because I suck ass at it compared to the player base. Nah, sucking at the game is not my fault. Don't tell me it's my fault. I know it's the game's fault. We all agree that whenever you're trash at a game, it is the game's fault. Archvile A tier for Quake 3, because that one-shot laser railgun is still my favorite thing ever. And now, let's rocket jump over into the next thing. Chapter 6. The Dark Ages. No, not that Dark Ages. 1999, the last year of the Golden Age. So why are we entering the Dark Ages of id Software? What we'd like to call the Doom of the Dark Ages. The Doom of the Dark Ages came out in 2004, a 5-year gap since Quake 3, and that's the longest of any game they had ever made at this point. Tim Willits is now the lead designer behind Quake 3. John Carmack is pushing the new fantastic shadowing techniques in id Tech 4. And it should be noted that id Tech 3 is the engine for Quake 3, and that was used in a countless number of 2000s video games. id Tech 4 was going to push boundaries graphically for Doom 3 with the lighting. Lighting may not seem like a big deal for a Doom game, and I would actually agree with that, but the whole point of Doom 3 wasn't to be an action game. id Software wanted to go slower, go away from their previous 90s formulas of run and gun gameplay. So they were just going to run away from that, and now they were going to do their best at making a horror game. Doom, the franchise, as a horror game was something nobody anticipated, and nobody really asked for it, to be frank. It's part of the reason why this is the Dark Ages. Nobody wanted this. Even Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud were all fighting the original proposal because in 2000, John Carmack wanted to reboot Doom. It wasn't going to be called Doom 3, but it would be a horror atmospheric reboot of Doom. Adrian and Kevin were the outliers. They were so against the idea, and probably because they've been around since the original Doom, but the rest of the other 20 people at id were all for it. And so those two founders, they had to either decide between getting with the program or getting out of id, which is a crazy ultimatum. Personally, I don't mind them wanting to make a horror game, but why did you have to pick Doom to do that with? Back in 1993, there were some moments in Doom 1 that probably freaked out some people, but it was not a pure horror franchise. It always prioritized action over horror, but in this case, it wasn't about the balance of those two things anymore. It was just pure horror. My first experience ever with Doom 3 was when I was a kid. I used to play Doom all the time, and my dad owned a copy of the sacred Doom 3. I always wanted to play it, but I couldn't. He would play it on his laptop, and I swear to God, guys, I would be crawling on this dude's shoulders trying to watch him play Doom 3. But he never really budged, so I never got around to playing Doom 3 until a few years after release. It was held in my head on this pedestal as this unobtainable game, but yet, when I finally played it, I really didn't care for it all that much. The Sacred Doom 3 was planned to come out in 2003. John Carmack acknowledged the development was taking a lot longer than expected, and the budget was originally $10 million, but that got increased to $14 million. More money and more time was going to be needed to get out this graphical masterpiece. Doom 3 also had the trouble of being released in one of the most competitive years of gaming ever in 2004. There was 2 other sequels coming out. One was Half-Life 2, and the other was Halo 2. You also had GTA San Andreas in the same year. That is a competitive year. It came out on Xbox in April 4th, 2005, but it came out on PC in August of 2004. Look at this gameplay footage we got showing right here. It's kind of hard to believe this came out on Xbox, right? Like, the lighting is so detailed, the darkness masks some of the blockier models and textures. It's kind of like how in a movie when there's bad CGI, if you make everything look darker, the CGI will look better. Doom 3, when you look at the enemy models lit up, they don't look like Xbox 360 graphics, but when you turn down the lighting and make it a horror game, this could pass as an Xbox 360 launch title easily. But it was on the original Xbox, and that's what's so impressive. Eventually, the game got the title of Doom 3 during production, even though it was still acted as a reboot to Doom 1. It was retelling the events of the portal opening on Mars, blah blah blah. You all don't give a shit about the story to Doom 1, who cares? At this point, Carmack had full reign, and yet he was going back on his words about stories and video games being pointless. You're dropping into Mars in the intro, and you're thinking, oh yeah, we're fallen. It's time to kick some demon ass. Wait, what? I'm just walking? Wait, what? There's an actual story in the... Why are there living humans? This isn't the Doom I used to know. What is this? Everything has been changed to be optimized for immersion rather than action. The UI, the character, and the way at the end of cutscenes that the camera flies into the back of your character's head like in Halo Infinite or GoldenEye. It's all meant to put you in the shoes of this character, literally, with the camera flying into the back of their head. And because of all of this, just like that intro, your initial thoughts may be to just reject Doom 3 because it's not like other Dooms. And even though Doom 3 was critically acclaimed at release, this is the reason why this is the Dark Ages to me. The average Doom fan did not like this direction for Doom, and they didn't like the slow-paced direction that id Software was taking in general. Look at our timeline, that is the Dark Ages. Most of the games id Software published were mobile titles, which, who was asking for that? That doesn't mean that they're bad, but just who was asking for this? He was also licensing off the other franchises to other companies rather than making games at id. He's looking at where he can advance tech, but he isn't looking at what's the most entertaining or creative thing that id can bring to their fans, something that people actually want. That was what Romero was for. These two canceled each other out, and that's why Doom, Quake, and Wolfenstein are so revered as they are. They both canceled out their ideas and made something great. All of these games in the Dark Ages, only 4 of them aren't mobile titles, and those are Doom 3, Quake 4, Quake Enemy Territories, and Rage. And only 2 of those games are made by id Software. I can promise you that there's barely a single id Software fan where one of those 4 games is their favorite in this entire timeline. They are very different games, and I think that's something I have a lot of respect for. Unlike Wolfenstein, Doom, and Quake from the 90s, that all felt like a natural evolution off of one another, all of the Dark Ages games that aren't mobile titles, they feel like they're completely different. Doom 3 you might have rejected because it was a horror game. I wouldn't even blame you. It doesn't feel like the best that id Software can offer, and I even agree that it not being an action game is kind of weird, especially when it's supposed to be a Doom game. But you have to accept that if you're going to give it a fair chance of competing with these legendary titles from earlier, you have to accept it's a horror game. Some have cited System Shock as being an inspiration, or Resident Evil for the horror direction of Doom 3, but I think it's obvious that the number one inspiration is not Resident Evil or System Shock, it's Half-Life 1. Half-Life 1 wouldn't be fully called a horror game, but the way the game is structured, you get off a monorail, you have a level of interactivity in the laboratories with health and armor stations on the walls, you explore the Black Mesa labs after the initial incident happens, you get to see the incident happen on your screen, and slowly everything starts to turn to hell around you. Doesn't that sound exactly like Doom 3? Doom 3, you get off a spaceship, you explore your environments, you have a huge level of interactivity with health and armor stations and log stations, you see the initial incident happen in front of your own eyes, and slowly everything around you starts to go to hell. That's just the Doom plotline formatted exactly the way the Half-Life 1 plotline is. It feels like to me that John Carmack and others at the company were amazed by the technological and the storytelling leap that Half-Life did, and they wanted to prove they could do better. They definitely didn't. They were not as good as Half-Life 1, which is a perfect video game. And I know some people say Doom 3 isn't scary at all, but I'm gonna make the argument that it is for at least the first half of the game. Doom 3 dials everything back. It is a much slower game, and it works because the game's design is fundamentally slower to build tension, because it's a horror game. To do anything takes time, like opening a door, you have to go on these little screens and use the cursor and click a button. To use your UI, you have to pull out this shitty PDA thing, and you can still get attacked while on this PDA. This is not pausing your game. You can get attacked by somebody who comes out of the shadows and hits you, and that could freak you out. And to use your flashlight in the game, you have to pull that sucker out, and you cannot have a weapon on you. You can only have your flashlight out. So when you're in a really dark area, you got to use your flashlight, and then you got to pull out your gun when you see somebody. You can't have them both out at the same time. It's all slower, fundamentally, to make it scarier. At its core, it's a horror game. Don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying it's going to make you scream like a crybaby, but it's also not going to make you scream like a crybaby on Twitter about how bad of a horror game it is. You're not going to be pissing yourself every 5 seconds or something. I'm not at all saying that. But if we can accept Quake 2 being nothing like Quake 1 and completely changing the trajectory of that franchise, then why can't we give Doom 3 a fair shot as a horror game? Let's just start with the sound. Get the sound guy up here. Hold up. Ed Lima. More like Ed Lima kiss you on the lips, because this guy is brilliant. The sound effects for all the button pressing on the PDA, the computers, it's all just so satisfying. Like, the sound effects are so crisp, satisfying, nice. I love it. The gun sounds, the main menu theme is by far the most underrated Doom theme out there. And even the reload sound effects, they might be my favorite in the entire series. The reload sound effects are like, oh my god, they are satisfying. That's honestly the best word to use for any of the sound effects in this game. Listen to the reload sound for a machine gun. Ooh. Oh shit. Ooh. Now a plasma rifle? Ah, oh my god. And I know everything I just said doesn't have a lot to do with horror, but let's talk about the creepy ambiance that's emphasized through the sound effects. The heavy moments, like when you hear a monster talking to you in the background. You feel your character's heart beating as you go down a hallway, and you can't tell if it's you or your character. The pipes shooting out steam coming off of the industrial walls of the UAC base. And my personal favorite sound effect, this thing. I know it's not scary, but tell me that is not the coolest sound effect you've ever heard. That is just so much fun to listen to. That spider thing crawling around, oh, that thing is so cool. I love it. It's so weird to describe, but like, you probably are hearing the sound effects I'm putting up, and you probably get what I'm trying to say. Like, it's satisfying. That's the best thing I can say about it. I'm really curious if any of you have games where the sound effects just really stand out to you. Comment that down below if any of you are interested. One of the biggest critiques I see of Doom 3's horror online is that it relies on jump scares, but I don't really agree with that, and I actually think the opposite. I don't really think it relies on jump scares at all. Well, it doesn't rely on them unless we're talking about this jump scare. Yeah, that's one of the most obnoxious things I've ever seen in a video game. When people say that the game relies on jump scares, I think of this scene, and I think something like this is what the game overall is like, but it's not. The game doesn't feel anything like this one scene. A lot of people online, I think, have a misconception about jump scares, like when they open up a door and there's an enemy standing there waiting for them, that's a jump scare. Or that if an enemy spawns behind you, that's a jump scare. I got 2 reasons as to why I don't think it's a jump scare. One, just because an enemy is somewhere you didn't know about doesn't make it a jump scare. That's weird to say, that like an enemy came out of nowhere, so therefore it's a jump scare. 2, you can hear these enemies. Nothing is all of the sudden. You can hear them anywhere they are on the screen. So how is giving you an audio cue that an enemy is nearby a jump scare? And therefore, I don't think these parts of Doom 3 are trying to be jump scares, and I don't think it relies on them. I say the word jump scares in quotations because I think people are just referring to when you grab armor and a zombie walks out of the shadows. Yeah, that can surprise you. It can be startling, but surprising and startling doesn't mean it's just a jump scare. One of the major points of a jump scare is that sensory overload. Let's go back to that scene earlier I showed off. That is sensory overload. The screen turns red, it zooms in on your character's face, and it does a loud sound effect. That is why it's a jump scare. None of these other things I'm mentioning do any of that. They're all very slow, well executed. They're surprising, but they're not a jump scare. The reason why it's surprising too is because it's a byproduct of the mixture of fantastic lighting, great shadow effects, and effective atmosphere, and you as a player not making sure there wasn't an enemy there to begin with. You didn't think about it. And so you have to be always conscientious and thinking about your surroundings when playing a game like this. To me, calling this a jump scare, calling an enemy coming out of the shadows a jump scare, would be like every time you walked over a Neomorph's dead body in Dead Space and they hop back to life, that's a jump scare. It's not. That happens so often in Dead Space. And the reason why it happens is because you didn't double check that the enemy was dead to begin with. You didn't think about if there was an enemy in the shadows or an enemy past this door or hearing the enemy behind you. So it's just a little bit startling. But it's not a jump scare. That is my critique of the critique that Doom 3 relies on jump scares. Another thing I wish more horror games did was what Doom 3 did with their flashlight. If any of you out here have played Doom 3, you might have been confused by my comments that you cannot have a gun out and your flashlight out at the same time. If you were confused by that, it's because you played Doom 3 on the Doom 3 BFG edition. When you play the BFG edition, then I hate to shun your experience. I don't want to make it sound like you didn't get to play Doom 3 the way it was intended, but Doom 3 BFG edition did make a huge change to the flashlight where every gun that you use in the game, you can turn it on while shooting. I hate this. I don't want to shun anybody's experience out here, but I don't think it was the way Doom 3 was supposed to be made. Making that change to me was really bad. The whole point of the original Doom 3 weapon system was that you had to pull out a flashlight separately so you could get a clear line of sight on something, and then you would have to pull back out your gun and fire. It adds more time in between being able to kill something and adds a higher stressor. You have to think about the lighting of the situation. You can't just turn it on while you're firing your shotgun. If you want lighting in a very dark area, you're going to have to sacrifice a weapon to get it. And that makes for some terrifying scenarios. You'd walk into a dark room, hear an enemy in one of the corners, and you'd pull out your flashlight, see it, and then you'd freak out and switch right back to your shotgun and shoot them. People didn't really appreciate this feature, which is why they changed it in the BFG edition, but I think the sacrificing of light to shoot and the sacrificing of shooting for light is part of the reason why Doom 3 worked well as a horror game. And it also showed off the technical prowess of the Doom 3 id Tech 4 engine with the lighting. I think all of that's taken out of the game with the BFG edition. The BFG edition did update the resolution and it did update the frames per second, but look at these environments. This isn't the BFG edition. This is OG Doom 3 on PC. I cannot believe anything like this came out in 2004. The lighting is stunning and it works so well with the horror. Everything from the sounds, the lighting, the ammo and resource hunting on higher difficulties that's reminiscent of adding challenges to make something scarier like in Resident Evil. The UI, the flashlight in the original Doom 3, it's all stuff that shows off Doom 3 as a horror game. And an effective one. It's not the scariest thing out there, it's not going to make you shit your pants or anything, but it still works, especially for the first half of the story. If you still don't agree with me about Doom 3 trying to be scary or trying to be a horror game, just look at the designs. This was the Imp from Doom 1. Here's the one in Doom 3. This is a Pinky in Doom 1. This is one in Doom 3. Just look at the covers of the Doom series. Doom 1. Oh yeah, that's right, I'm a badass. Doom 2. Oh yeah, we're gonna kill this Styber demon in one fell swoop. And then there's Doom. What the hell is that? Is that thing getting hurt? Or is it trying to hurt me? What? I can't even tell what's going on with that Hell Knight. All I can tell you is that that cover is creepy, even if I don't even know what's happening on it. If Doom 3 does anything right, it's the technical aspects that make for some of the best lighting ever to be featured on a console game, and it's the horror. It's the scares. And I really want to just end off this segment about Doom 3's horror by reading the instructions on how to experience Doom 3 the way it was meant to be. These instructions came from the manual of Doom 3, the original copies of it from 2004 that were sacred, one of which was in my living room. The excerpt from the manual reads, "Doom 3 is a terrifying sci-fi horror experience. It is not recommended for the cowardly or the faint of heart. For those who dare to face Doom 3 as it was intended, lock your door, turn off your lights, and turn up the sound." Hell yes, press play on a harder difficulty and prepare to be scared. That is what I'm talking about. Now that Doom 3 has proved itself as a horror game, where do my problems begin? Well, it has an identity crisis for the entire last half of the game. It should have really just committed to being a horror game from start to finish, or being an action game from start to finish, because it doesn't do either of these things perfectly. Like I said, it's not going to be like shit your pants horror, but it's also not a really good action game either. None of the shooting mechanics are really that satisfying, and the animation reactions feel really stiff, and they feel very bullet spongy. The fact that Quake 2 actually has more bullet reactions and animations from the enemies when you shoot at them just says a lot to me about Doom 3, because they do not react at all to you hitting them. The more you play through Doom 3, the more it starts to feel kind of like Doom 1 and Doom 2 by getting all the weapons. You have this OP cube thing that insta-kills anything that you fire it at. The one massive OG hell-based Doom level is at the end of the game. Doom 3 wanted to be pure horror, but then it opted out to go back to being the badass Doom guy Space Marine stuff with a massive battle at the end. I don't think I'd mind it if it was the only part of the game that felt like OG Doom, but it's the last few hours of the game. You're racing from room to room, gunning around enemies, doing a run and gun all over again. It stops being scary. This all bothers me because it's not refined as a pure scary game, and it's not a refined pure action game. It tries to flip-flop, especially the shooting feels very boring. It's by far the least interesting part about the game, and that sucks because the main selling point towards the last half is just that all the scares are gone and you're going to be doing shoot, shoot, pew, pew around every quarter. But you're going to be doing the shoot, shoot, pew, pew without any of the bang, bang of the original two Quake games. Both expansions kind of acknowledge this problem by just not trying to be scary at all. You remember how I said to only play Doom 3 the original experience, not the BFG edition? If you're going to play the base game of Doom 3, play the original. But when playing Doom 3 Resurrection of Evil or Lost Missions, just switch to the BFG edition. The flashlight being on the gun speeds up the pace, and that's good for the DLCs because they're meant to be action games and not horror games. Half of your experience is going to be on the base game, half of your experience is going to be on the BFG edition, and that's how you're going to get the ideal experience. Resurrection of Evil in particular is the closest you're going to get to classic Doom. They ditch the horror, they up the action, and even if their Half-Life inspiration wasn't obvious enough, they literally add a physics gun that's directly ripped off from Half-Life 2. They immediately give you back all your weapons and all your items through the base game and then give you a physics gun. I promise you it's meant to be an action game. I honestly kind of loved Resurrection a lot. It's the third expansion pack from id Software that I love. It is the third and last one. I think Resurrection of Evil is really good, and Lost Missions felt a little bit like a snooze fest in comparison, but it's also really just meant to be a few levels that are added on, whereas Resurrection of Evil is a full-blown expansion pack. It's entirely its own thing, and it works on its own merits as an action game. I recommend Resurrection of Evil as a must-play DLC from id Software. And I think even if you hate Doom 3 for the horror and the slow pace, then I think you should still try Resurrection of Evil because it's kind of id Software's way of giving you classic Doom again after you didn't enjoy the base game. A lot of fans didn't care for that base game, and Resurrection of Evil is definitely a response to that. It's a course correction, so I think even if you hated Doom 3, you should still try out this expansion pack. You can boil everything I've just said this whole entire time down to one thing. Please try out Doom 3. Out of all of the heavy hitters that it was fighting against in 2004, it's definitely the weakest, but I think on a technical level it is astonishing, and the atmosphere is good enough to hold you from beginning to end. The best thing it has going for it is that tech, and it is that ambiance, it is that lighting, it is the sound effects that are just going to satisfy anybody who's playing the game. And I'm not asking you to play the game front to back, but I'm asking you to just give it a shot and see where your feelings lie with it. I could see somebody hating it, I could see somebody loving it, I totally get both sides of that. My only request is don't go into it hating it just because it's a horror game. That to me is just playing a comparisons game, and if I did that, then I would just hate everything. I would hate every video game that comes out because I'd just be comparing it to something else. Part of what I do, because these are company retrospectives, like I'm talking about all of id Software, is that I compare games to one another, but in the end of the day, I am not rating Doom 3 as a comparison to Doom 1 and 2. I'm rating it on its own. And with that in mind, I talked it up a lot. And Doom 3 is still kind of a mixed bag for me, but I'm going to give it Baron of Hell B tier. If the impressive tech wasn't there, it would probably be C tier due to the identity crisis of what it wants to be for the last half of the game, and then also the weak shooting mechanics for me. But that first half of the game, the atmosphere and the technical leaps, is what makes it B tier. Soon after Doom 3's release, Adrian Carmack, who ultimately disagreed with the direction that id Software was headed, he wanted to leave. He wanted to pursue more with art and other business projects that he could work on. Kevin Cloud took over the whole art department after him, and according to the contract, Adrian was forced to sell his 40-ish% stock of id Software for $11 million. They gave him $11 million, but were offered a bid by Activision of over $100 million, which to Adrian Carmack, that indicated that his 40-ish% stock of id was worth closer to $40 million and not $11 million. If you're like me and you can't do simple math, you just use a calculator, and that's how you get 40-ish% of $100 million is $40 million. They settled on an undisclosed amount in court privately. Adrian Carmack went on with his life, and now he owns a resort that is located in Ireland, and he rejoined back together with John Romero in the mid-2010s, where they were working on a new video game, which they announced in a Force Awakens parody-style video. They were working on a new IP called Black Room at the time, which they got some crowdfunding for, but it was ultimately canceled during development for unknown reasons. I'll be honest, I'd give so much money to play a full version of Black Room, knowing that it was made by the two original founders of id. Sadly, that dream's never going to come true. But it's okay, because we still got more games to talk about. 2005 hits, and we have a $15 million budget with Quake 4. Doom got a return, so naturally Quake was next, and this time we aren't doing multiplayer shit, fuck that. id Software hasn't had any consistency since the 1990s, and it seems like they want to keep it that way. Raven Software, while being owned under Activision, used the id Tech 4 engine to create Quake 4. They did have some supervision by id Software with checkups and planning, but I think people really over-exaggerate how much id Software was involved with Quake 4, because they really didn't do anything. They basically said, hey, use our engine and just keep us in the loop. They pieced out to go work on mobile games and to evolve the next id Tech engine. Quake 4 looks very similar to Doom 3 with graphics, but it does play very differently. The shooting feels punchier, and you can feel it whenever you hit a Strogg in the face and they go flying when you hit them with a shotgun. The squad mates you work with add teamwork dynamics that's never been in an id game before. You can heal yourself by talking to the medic, you can get armor from one of them, and you can get ammo from another. This causes you to frantically be moving around and talking to these guys while in a battle and trying to prevent them from dying. That's very intense for the player to experience because you don't want any of these people to be out of your line of sight. Quake 4, for its pacing and for its identity, it beats Doom 3 easily by a lot. Because Doom 3's biggest problem is that it doesn't know if it wants to be a horror game or an action game. Quake 4 is just an action game. It does not try to be horror at all. And the only scene in the entire game that even remotely gives off horror, it works so well because it's only one moment. It's probably one of the most memorable moments that's technically not from an id Software game, but it's published as an id Software game. And that is the part where the Strogg, they put you through their machine and slowly transform your body. And so it's just this body horror sequence, and you never get stuff like this in a video game. Body horror is not common in the video game industry. This is just brutal to watch, but it's so impactful because the rest of the game is not a horror game. but this is horrific. Also, the band Tweaker, who did the music for Doom 3, they also helped out with the music on Quake 4. They did the main menu theme, which has got to be, just like Doom 3, one of the most underrated themes on this whole video. You're going to hear it in the background while I'm talking about it, but there's machinery sound effects to it, these drill sound effects that incite a feeling of robotics, or in the case of Quake, the inhuman Strogg. They're made up of flesh and machine, but the emphasis on machine in the theme song really shows us the Strogg is different from us. I think it's just, it works so perfectly. It like really shows you like, no, these things aren't human. These things don't have a conscience. Like, they are mostly robot. It's something I really appreciate about the subtleties of the theme song. I'm going to rate this game just to show you where it is compared to Doom 3. For me, it is Archvile A tier. A great action game that had some performance issues on Xbox 360, but it did run fine on PC. It looks great, feels great, and to me it has a more defined tone than Doom 3. The action works, and really the only reason I wanted to talk about it, even though it's not made by id, is because I just want to hype up Raven Software again. And I don't know when's the next time I'm ever going to be able to talk about Raven Software on this channel again. So here it goes. Heretic, Hexen, Quake 4, the Wolfenstein reboot from 2009, and even the cult classic Singularity from 2010. They never got as much praise as other game developers, and that just sucks because they deserved it. I thought I'd just give them a shout out because nowadays they're just Activision's bitch who exclusively makes Call of Duty maps. It's really annoying. It's honestly such a waste of potential, and it's so sad for such an amazing company. It's honestly just so sad with how much this game developer proved their worth. id Software was out here cooking up fresh meat after Doom 3's expansion, and another company called Splash Damage was working on yet another Quake game, probably in response to Quake 4 being more single-player focused, because this had nothing to do with Activision once again, and I feel like it's worth noting it's technically a part of the Quake franchise. Briefly talking about it, it's called Quake Wars Enemy Territories. Here's some footage of it since I don't remember a ton about it. There was giant maps, cool vehicles, cool weapons, close encountered battles, and massive player counts, so it's very reminiscent of Battlefield. If that sounds like your type of game, or if you're a Battlefield fan and a Quake fan, then yeah, you gotta try this thing out at some point. You would love it. One team played as the humans and one as the Strogg. It was a blast. But it's not id Software's game, so we have to continue. id Software was prepping all their fans of their OG 90s games with the new meat they had on the grill. They're about to be so back after Doom 3. Their big comeback is making flip phone mobile games. Let's fucking go! Wait, mobile games. Chapter 7. The Dark Ages, ported to flip phones. Yeah, so if you couldn't tell that we're in the Dark Ages, now you definitely know. Apparently, everyone wanted to capitalize off the new market of mobile games, and even John Carmack, in his own words, he wanted to make actual good games for phones because he thought the phone marketplace was just terrible. They ported some of their old games and immediately started work on their first original mobile title with Doom RPG. My theory to all of this was that John Carmack wanted to test out their chops on new and up-and-coming devices. That was his way of testing out new tech. Carmack has always been interested in new tech and new advancements, so seeing what they could do with mobile phones was probably something he viewed as a challenge. I think he also really wanted to make a lot of money for whatever their next big project was going to be. This would also explain why they licensed out a lot of their old IPs like Wolfenstein or Quake to Raven Software and Enemy Territories to Splash Damage. They didn't have time for any of that other stuff. They just wanted to make some mobile games, stay as a small studio, make some good money, and also test out flip phone hardware. That's very small in 2005, and if you don't include Activision's publishing or side studios that helped them out, this is their team, just a little over 30 people. They released Doom RPG in 2005, then Orcs and Elves, a new IP of theirs in 2006, then Orcs and Elves 2 in 2007, Wolfenstein RPG in 2008, the Doom 2 RPG coming out in 2010, Quake Live coming out to browser for free in 2010, and then Rage Mutant Bash TV was their last mobile game to come out in 2011, before their first new AAA game in 2011 since Doom 3 in 2004. That's almost 10 years of a wait for the next big id Software release. I'm going to briefly touch on these just because I did kind of crap on them earlier, but that's just because nobody actually cares to play old mobile games unless it's like something they're nostalgic for. I'm going to admit, though, all of these games got good reviews, and John Carmack was right when he said that the phone gaming landscape was abysmal, and so he was making it better with Doom RPG and Orcs and Elves, which were nominated for Mobile Game of the Year. There's a multitude of reasons to believe they made these to elevate the mobile video game quality standard. The bar was just so low, and id Software was coming to raise it up. That's awesome, and I respect that, but also these just aren't most people's cup of tea. I could emulate these, and I'd probably have a decent time, but scrolling through the gameplay of these, I'd probably just watch some gameplay footage because I don't think I'd want to fully play through one. This is tough, because I think that some of the review scores are probably benefiting off of the idea that it is just a shitty flip phone. If this exact game released on a console or on a PC, people would complain that there's just no audio, there's not much music, there's barely any sound effects, the game looking very old, the game not having good quality of life mechanics, the game running weirdly, the game not being fast enough, all these things. But because it's on a shitty Nokia flip phone, everyone is doing the bell curve of, well, it's much better than everything else that runs on this piece of garbage, so whatever, give it a good rating. I am sure all of these are good games, but I'm sure they're good games for the mobile gaming market at the time. Maybe that's just me, prove me wrong. Somebody out there who played Rage Mutant Bash TV, tell me how good it was, please. Anyway, I haven't played a lot of these, so I'm not going to continue talking about them, but just know that John Carmack got his wish by adding some good games into the flip phone market at the time, and he got to dip his toes into that, and he got some good money out of it as well. So what are they going to spend that money on? id Software from 2007 to 2013 was working on two major games. The first of those was the canceled iteration of Doom 4 that would play similarly to other military shooters at the time like Killzone or Call of Duty. You look at the footage of the canceled Doom game and it reminds me a lot of Resistance with its tone and its art style. You know, the PlayStation exclusive Resistance. This is footage of that right over here. id Software was knee-deep in production of this, and then they canceled it due to disagreeing on the direction it was headed, and because id Software was just bought out by ZeniMax. ZeniMax wanted them to move forward on their other original IP called Rage before going back to Doom. They especially wanted to do this after the fan backlash to Doom 3. Doom 4 was originally announced in 2007, with Rage being announced in the late 2000s as well. It was the first id game to be promoted on consoles more than PC, and Rage was also the reason that Doom 4 went through development hell. id Software was honed in on finishing Rage, especially after being bought by ZeniMax, who was the owner of the Bethesda Game Studios in 2009. ZeniMax and Bethesda now own id, and they want them to get Rage out the door so they can move on to rebooting one of their beloved classic id Software franchises. id Tech 5 wasn't as revolutionary as the previous upgrades, but Rage had excellent graphics and facial animations regardless of not being as big of a deal of an upgrade. The small team that John Carmack led was inflating once Bethesda owned them, because more and more employees are getting added in by Bethesda, and if we look at id now, they have over 200 employees. This did not sit well with John Carmack. He decided to help out with Rage until October 4th of 2011, and then he was going to help finally finishing Doom 4, but his fate with id was uncertain after that. John Carmack, sitting around some days upset that the team was growing so much, he started to see the advancements of the Oculus technology. You remember virtual reality when it first became a growing market? It was a huge deal. People thought it was crazy that this stuff was coming out. And John Carmack got that feeling of what it was like to make that engine for Doom, to make the fully 3D game of Quake. The next step for gaming. Carmack in virtual reality was seeing a new tapping of potential for possibly the next revolutionary video game. John Carmack asked if they could focus on VR at ZeniMax and Bethesda, and they said absolutely not, and how they had no interest at this time. And then the Doom 4 game got canceled in 2013. Both of these factors and the growing id Software employee number, that made Carmack just say, I'm done here. Ultimately, it led to his departure on November 22nd, 2013. The MVP of id, the one who revolutionized the industry, and without Carmack, id would be not what it is today. The tech genius who you didn't want to be on the bad side of was now on the bad side of id, and so he left. Who's going to actually take his place? The last founder of id Software is gone. Before we talk about where the company's going to go, let's talk about the last game that John Carmack made for them. Rage. A shooter that was set in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. It's the end of id Software's dark ages, and honestly it's a fitting end because we're at the lowest note. Because in my opinion, Rage is the worst id Software game ever made. Chapter 8. The Low Point. Rage. Rage did nothing for Carmack's advancement of technology, but on top of all that, 2 years before it released, we saw Borderlands come out. And then 1 year before Borderlands, we saw Fallout 3 come out. So how was Rage going to compete with a growing market of post-apocalyptic shooters? It wasn't even going to be able to compete because it's not even close to being as good. I'm just going to lay it all out. Rage is boring. I say it's their worst game, and I'm not comparing it to like Hover Tank or Catacombs 3D. I'm talking about when I'm stacking it amongst all of the things on this timeline. It just really might be one of the worst games I've talked about on this channel. And I can realize that if Borderlands didn't exist, or if Fallout 3 didn't exist, then maybe Rage would be in a better place as a franchise, because it does remind me in a lot of ways of Borderlands. But ironically enough, Borderlands 1 feels more like an id game than Rage does. It's way more action-packed, like your stereotypical id game. But they both share a similarity of being just fetch quest games, where you jump from one lifeless character to another lifeless character, receiving boring quest lines where you run from point A to point B and then back to point A to finish off your objective. That is what you're going to do non-stop in Borderlands and in Rage. The only difference is that Rage doesn't have as much action. The voice actors have nothing to work with, and they feel like husks of human beings that are just spewing out quests at you. There's been plenty of other problems that id Software games have had, but one problem I have never encountered is that when you're going from point A to point B, it's always fun. And yet every problem in Rage is that going from point A to point B is boring. You're going to be staying in areas with no enemies, like little hub world spaces, and then just jumping from quest giver to quest giver for hours on end. Oh, and then when you're finally in a shooting battle, well, sorry, because the shooting is just mediocre. The best part about Rage is the driving can be fun, but it's too rare, and the battle arenas with the cars are really small, and the amount of cars there are is also really low, so it doesn't really feel like anything more than just okay. I mean, it's better than most other things in the game. Out of all the problems I have with id Software games, Rage is the only one that in this whole timeline, I can say that if you want to play something fun, don't play Rage. Every other game of theirs has some sort of fun factor to it. Rage doesn't. I've tried on 5 different occasions trying to get into this game, and I can never do it. I always want to enjoy it. I hate disliking a game. Like, I don't want to dislike a game. And I always just end up getting a few hours into it, and then I just want to fall asleep. What if Rage is trying to do something different? Is it trying to be environmentally atmospheric? Well, I hope not, because the environments are bland with little to no environmental storytelling to catch your eye. There's nothing going on in these environments. There's nothing you can tell that's happening. There's no implied storytelling in any of it. It's very bland. Is it trying to be a post-apocalyptic world filled with interesting characters you work for? Well, I also hope that's not the case too, because the characters are very boring on every level except for their designs. The actual way they look and dress can be very indicative of where they are in this social hierarchy. Like, you have the rich mayor, or you have the TV host, or you have like the poor mechanic. But other than their designs, they're very boring. It's the neutered post-apocalyptic experience that nobody asked for. Even if we take all comparisons to other post-apocalyptic games out of it, like, let me just ask the question. This is not rhetorical. Who is Rage for? Who would really enjoy Rage 1? I can't say I know anyone that would actually like Rage 1, and the only people I would ever recommend it to are hardcore wasteland shooters who are searching for a game to fill their void. If they've played everything else, then I'm like, alright, here you go. Here's a wasteland shooter. It's generic, it's boring, it's lifeless, it's repetitive, it's mediocre, but it's an apocalypse shooter, so I recommend it, I guess. That's the only type of person I could think of I'd recommend Rage to. Who is that game for? Because I don't even think id Software could answer that. If Rage had anything to say as a video game, if it had anything to say with its characters, I'd probably be a little bit more forgiving. Like, Fallout 3 isn't known for having stellar gameplay. Honestly, the gameplay to Fallout 3 is even worse than it is in Rage. But Fallout 3 is loved because of its characters and what the game allows you to do in it and what it's trying to say through those characters. And what it's trying to say through its themes. If Rage had anything to say, I'd be a little more forgiving. But there's nothing here. And if there is anything, it's so watered down with boring performances that it's hard for my brain to even take it in. It's literally just that hard for me to listen to these characters talk. The best way to sum it up is that it is everything I don't like about 2000s gaming tropes. It was outdated on arrival in 2011. It has all the 2000s gaming tropes that everybody already felt like were outdated, but they had it in this 2011 game. The nasty color palette, the feeling of it, the monotonous time between quests and all that filler space from going from quest giver to quest giver, the constant loading screens for every single door you open, the obsession with the dreary look of the game, the constant mini-games that usually are very underdeveloped like racing or a wave-based horde minigame, the jumping around hub worlds to get from character to get through a side quest, these same characters spewing out a lot of world-building information in the most boring way possible, or having to read logs or audio and stuff to understand any of the world building. The game wants you to pay attention even if there's nothing I care about being said. There's crafting, upgrades, repairing mechanics. It's a game that fakes having environmental storytelling through ugly visuals. The visuals are on par with a game like BioShock, but there's nothing visually appealing or anything environmentally being told to me outside of this toilet needing to be repaired. Whereas good games like BioShock, yes, they look ugly very intentionally, but every second of that game is conveying some form of information to me through its environment. It's this bygone era of cliches and tropes from the 2000s that it still feels latched onto, even though it released already 4 years too late. That stuff was already starting to feel a bit out of touch in the late 2000s. And Rage was 2011. The thing is, too, is that Rage isn't even the best version of these tropes. Like, if this game came out in 2007, there would still be some outdated feelings to it because it's not even the best use of those tropes. The more and more I play Rage, I feel Rage, I'm really starting to think it makes sense that John Carmack left id right after this game came out. If this game came out I never played the DLC called The Scorchers, but it's worth $5 and apparently it comes with a whole new quest line. I'm not even going to bother playing that. I'm just giving Rage a D tier. It's our lowest rated id Software game, period. And now, as we finally move out of the dark ages, we're going to be moving into the if it ain't broke, don't fix it era. We have to recap a little bit with Robert Duffy is now taken over as the head of programming at id Software. Kevin Cloud is now one of the biggest heads in management, and every original founder, Adrian Carmack left in 2005, John Carmack was the last man standing in 2013, Tom Hall was the first to go in 1993, and John Romero became detached from id in 1996. All of them are gone. And with them being gone, we see a new direction that id Software is going to take. You have people who are veterans who are in charge. They're seeing this point of id differently from us. They're not viewing the drag with mobile games and Rage as the low point of the company. They're viewing it as the start of the company's biggest comeback ever. They start that comeback by bringing back the original Doom games and Doom 3 in the BFG edition that we talked about in 2012. I think sure that some of the changes to Doom 3 were very unnecessary, but this was a solid pack. Everybody was at a low point in id Software, but in 2015 they announced a new Doom game. Everybody was skeptical about it. It wasn't the original Doom 4 promised to us in 2007. Id confirmed that they're going away from the slow Doom 3. This is a series reboot, and they were going to be using the original Doom artwork as a reference point for the look of the game. They were lowering the amount of story that was being told in this Doom reboot, and they were bringing something in called Glory Kills, which has evolved off of an idea called sync meleeing from the Doom 4 cancel project. This all sounds very promising, it all sounds very nice to believe in, but we are in 2015, almost 2016. I don't know if going back to 90s games is going to be the best thing for them. The hype was a little bit shaky for Doom 2016, Everything they said made it sound like they were subverting modern gaming tropes. Most single-player FPS titles were slow, atmospheric, or gritty, and they were throwing all of that away to embrace classic 90s shooter gameplay. That's not what you're supposed to do. And without John Carmack, without Romero or Adrian or Tom, are you even going to be able to succeed at that?
Rip and tear until it is done.
Chapter 9. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The moment you boot up Doom 2016, because of how iconic this intro is, all of your doubts will just immediately disappear. It tells you right out of Hell's Gate that Doom is about killing demons, and we are not going to get in your way of letting you do that. You destroy the system that's holding you down, run out to grab your Doom Guy armor, and now you're going to relive what made every 90s shooter amazing, but in 2016, no other video game is doing that. Way earlier in this timeline, I was telling you about what I thought about Doom 1 and Doom 2, and I mentioned how the gameplay loop is not outdated. Their format isn't outdated. Doom 2016 actually proves that 90s FPS tropes are not outdated. In a day and age where there's iPad parents, when kids are aggravated, they just throw Blippi on an iPad in front of them. Doom 1 and Doom 2 are kind of the perfect format for that generation, but they came out 20 years ago. They're fast-paced. Hundreds of monsters on screen, racing around, abilities, and movement that's so fast it feels like a challenge to master it. That doesn't sound like something that would have worked in the 90s, but it did. That sounds like something that would work for the iPad kids of today. It was out of style for a little bit in the mid-2000s and the mid-2010s, but this format is perfect for the ADHD post-smartphone generation. My generation. The speed of Doom 2016 works for them. And it also works for all the millennials and the Gen Xers out there who grew up with the older games, which technically I also grew up with because that was what my dad and I always played. I was an original ADHD post-smartphone generation kid, but instead of playing on an iPad, I was too busy trying to beat the first mission of Doom from 1993 in under 15 seconds. Because all I cared about was a game that begged for my attention in the same way that social media begs for your attention, or a screen does, or an iPad, or a television set. Doom did that for me. It begs for your attention. First half of 2016 doesn't have the speed of the older 90s games yet, so it kind of almost feels like the last half of Doom 3 in a lot of ways. I wouldn't say it's slow, but let's use cars as a good example. Doom 1 and Doom 2 are going at 60 miles per hour on the road. They're going really, really fast. Doom 3 for the first half's going around 10 miles per hour, and for the last half's going around 30 miles per hour. Doom 2016 is going around 30 to 40 miles per hour for the first half of the game. But that does change, because the moment you drop down into the mythological depths of hell, the best hell has ever looked, by the way, with these giant skulls of past demons that trampled through the landscapes. Walking through this place makes Doom Guy feel so much more badass, because it's like you're the equivalent of these giants, even though you're just the size of a normal human. Once you touch down here a little over halfway through the plot, the game becomes non-stop 60 mile per hour classic Doom. The car speeds up, man. It speeds up and it does not stop. Way earlier I said the difficulty of this franchise doesn't come from how hard the enemies are, but it comes from how much shit we can put on your screen and how much you're having to fight at the same time. It makes you feel like a badass because you're fighting so much at once, and it doesn't make one in particular enemy feel like a bullet sponge. The last 4 missions of Doom 2016 embody this philosophy. The final stretch here, the final few missions, is probably the best Doom content ever created. It is run-and-gun gameplay, the amount of enemies being the difficulty, the mythological hell environments, the Spider Mastermind boss fight, which is my favorite in the whole game. It's pure perfection. I don't think it can be understated how much of a risk it was to go back to 90s gaming philosophy in this time period as well. Things were just going slower. Battlefield 1, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Homefront, Dishonored 2, and the only titles that actually were just as fast as 90s shooters were mostly multiplayer games like Overwatch or Titanfall 2. Going backwards to these 90s formulas in a single-player game was very risky, but it had the payoff of a lifetime because id Software might not have revolutionized the industry with Doom 2016, They didn't have groundbreaking graphics, a technological prowess this time. It's interesting to see the repeated cultural pattern. Like, you look throughout history and fashion repeats itself eventually. What's attractive repeats itself, conventional attractiveness. And then movies, they repeat themselves eventually in terms of what's popular in genres. This was the first time I had ever seen the video game industry have a repeated cultural pattern, because video games are still a very young art form. They didn't revolutionize the industry with anything groundbreaking. They revolutionized the industry by resurrecting the forgotten shooter format from 20 years ago. The multiplayer worked as the standard arena shooter, because obviously if we're going back to 90s formulas, we should also bring back the arena shooter, right? It probably didn't have the lasting impact that they expected. It was fine. It wasn't very popular, and it worked for what it was, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was a must-play multiplayer or anything like that. You can't really find anybody on it anymore. They also had Snap Map, where the community could make their own Doom maps, and that was a very fun addition because people were remaking old Doom 1 and Doom 2 maps, but in the modern engine, which is nostalgic for old Doom fans like me. When I was younger, I was pretty critical of this reboot, and I didn't have a lot of hope for it. Doom 2016 is not a perfect game, but it was the perfect comeback for id. And it changed the industry once again by bringing us all back to the past and kicking off our if it ain't broke, don't fix it era. I'm giving it Archvile A tier. In 2017, id Software was making a push to bring back other dormant franchises like Quake with Quake Champions. Id recently has been kind of making comments that Quake is this dead franchise that can't get them any money, but the problem with Champions is that where Doom 2016 was embracing Dooms of the past, Quake Champions is just following the tropes of the present, and it didn't work. I don't hate Quake Champions, but it feels like id was just trying to make a quick buck releasing a free-to-play Overwatch knockoff with Quake characters. It's odd that it got greenlit. I haven't played enough of this to care that much, but for anybody who's wondering, I'd throw this into Kako Demon C tier. I really don't understand why it's even trying to be in the Quake franchise if it's not going to try to mimic the originals in any way, like how Doom 2016 mimics Doom 1 and Doom 2. And even if we're talking about Quake Champions on its own merits, it's just fine, which explains the C tier. It's the hero shooter dilemma. It's where you take a franchise and you just make a generic hero shooter out of it, and that's why I give it C tier, because they just decided to slap the Quake name on it, call it a day, and it's just disrespectful to the brand. And id, if you really think Quake is dead, nah, you gotta look back through history, because it isn't. It has a massive fan base, and you guys just messed up with Quake Champions. Nobody thinks of Quake when they look at this. They just think of a free-to-play, tropey greed fest. We also have another cash grab with Doom VFR in 2017. It was mostly regarded as a failure by a lot of people. There's a plague throughout the whole experience of VFR, which appropriately means virtual fucking reality. The plague is that you don't move around like you normally would in a Doom game. Instead, you have to point at the ground and teleport yourself to move everywhere. This was universally hated, and I kind of get why. I think the developers knew that they can't make a VR game that's as fast-paced as Doom 2016 with the standard looking around movement. Think about VR shooters. Not many of them, if any, are as fast as Doom Eternal. And by getting rid of the standard movement, it just feels clunky, it feels slower than the games you're trying to replicate, and it does not work. But now we have to transition into talking about what I thought was the ultimate what the hell moment. It's not Doom Eternal. Instead, it was the ultimate Hail Mary at trying to revive what was dead on arrival as a franchise due to its super poor sales for the first game. id Software wanted a comeback. They got it with Doom 2016. And now, on May 14th, 2019, id dropped Rage 2. Tim Willett said that the reason why Rage 2 was created was to fulfill the promises that the team of Rage 1 made but never delivered on. And on its own, Rage 2 really should not exist. Rage 1 failed financially, it didn't get a big following, nobody really cared about the game, the company was just bought out by Bethesda, and I thought Rage 2 was just going to be dead on arrival. And it kinda is. But really only financially. Avalanche Studios and Bethesda were the main developers behind this, and id Software took a backseat, kind of the same exact way they did with Quake 4 with Raven Software. They supervised some stuff, but mostly they were focused on Doom Eternal at this point. Avalanche Studios was responsible for the Mad Max game in 2014, and that's the main reason they were chosen for Rage, because if there's one franchise that Rage is trying to emulate, it's Mad Max. The brown deserts, the crazy factions, and the monster truck chases, yeah, that's all Mad Max. I think everybody was a little bit skeptical over Rage 2, and I even played it, and I didn't really care for it when it came out. Upon revisiting it, though, it might be my hate of Rage 1 talking, but Rage 2, actually kind of underrated. It's got all that classic running and gunning, but now it's slapped into an actual open world where you can have car chases that don't feel like you're in these tiny, cramped arena spaces with 1 or 2 cars firing at each other. Now you can fight entire brigades of vehicles that are traveling across the wasteland. A wasteland that also actually has a personality this time. It's not lifeless, it's far goofier, it's more vibrant, and they even added a bunch of trees that make it look like a tropical nuclear paradise. It's sad that Rage 2 didn't make a lot of money because it's really raising the bar for the franchise. Nobody played it even though Rage 2 was what we wanted from the first game. It was basically an FPS Mad Max. It takes the stuff that kind of works about Rage 1 with the environments and the car chases and dials all that stuff up, and then it adds some 90s gunplay in there with ammo crates and health popping out of enemies' heads when you shoot them. I want to say also that this doesn't necessarily mean it was inspired off of 90s games, because there's other titles like Far Cry and Crysis that were already doing the whole ammo crate thing years ago. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that Avalanche was probably inspired off of their own Mad Max game. But when it comes to gunplay and equipment, honestly, the thing I think of the most is Crysis. Not many games are inspired off of Crysis, but if you are, good for you, because that game rocks. Rage 2 kind of feels like a lot of video games slammed together into a mess of a product, and there's no good story here, there's no good dialogue, but at least Rage 2, when it's being inspired, it's inspired off of actual good games. It wears them on its shoulders, and it's not just tropes of a bygone era like Rage 1. Using your equipment and abilities to kill enemies in funny ways or to cause something unexpected to happen feels a lot like Crysis. You can't play off the environment as much in Rage 2, but the guns all have special ways to kill enemies that feel unique and satisfying. One that fires a remote detonator sticky bomb is my favorite, where you can blow it up anytime you want. There's also a gravity machine gun that fires a bunch of anti-gravity missiles, and you can cause people to go flying into the air or smashing into walls or smashing into each other. Everybody loves when the combat shotgun in games gives off a fantastic ragdoll effect. You fire it and the NPC goes flying. Rage 2 knew that you wanted that, so they added a secondary fire that is an anti-gravity like wind burst, where it makes enemies just go flying into ragdoll mode. That's listening to what people like about weapons. Like, people want responsive feedback, and giving me just an anti-gravity shotgun, that's freaking awesome. The weapons are just fun to use. They all have these secondary fires, which is something I appreciate. It's a lot better than anything I got around in the first game as well. If you're not doing a mission, or if you're not in a car chase, or making an enemy fly into the air using anti-gravity bullets, there's lots of stuff to do while just hanging out in Rage 2's world. And not all of this is perfect. Some of it falls into the whole Ubisoft tropes where you're just fighting outposts all over the map, but they keep you just interested enough to always have something going on. I like how there's just ice cream trucks that roam around the desert, but instead of selling ice cream, they sell bullets. You can find entire platoons of cars driving by to battle, somebody getting killed on the side of the road that you can save, or you could just go around and do as many of the activities as you want across the wasteland. But it's better than the claustrophobic streets of Rage 1 and the feeling of just going from Quest Giver 1 to Quest Giver 2 and then running back to Quest Giver 1, which just gets repetitive, boring, and doesn't let the player have fun in a Mad Max-inspired apocalypse world. Avalanche really proved themselves, because I would have guessed that this was made by id Software. If someone didn't tell me that it was Avalanche, I would have just said, oh, look, id got a new game, and moved on. It feels like an id game. On its own, Rage 2 is a blast, and that's something I can even say without comparing it to the first game. I'ma slap this into Baron of Hell B tier. Chapter 10. If it ain't broke, then go farther with it. We've reached the end of our timeline. The year is 2020. Everybody was freaking out over a pandemic, and the video game market was actually booming because everybody was shut down from their social lives and all went to video games. id was working on the engine id Tech 7, which the main focus was going to be improving performance while still maintaining a very crisp look to it. If any of you have played Doom Eternal, they accomplished this fairly well. Doom Eternal actually runs at a higher frame rate for me than Doom 2016, and that's because of all these performance improvements. March 20th, 2020 hit, and you were either the most manly man ever and you were buying Animal Crossing New Horizons, or you were a girly girl like myself buying Doom Eternal. All of my skepticism got blown away by a super shotgun, because Doom Eternal is that mentality of if it ain't broke, then don't fix it, except they saw the success of Doom 2016 and decided to change that motto, just tweak it, to if it ain't broke, then dial it up to 11. Doom Eternal is my daydreaming fantasy of what a Doom game should be, and it's one of my favorite first-person shooters ever made, albeit with a couple of hiccups. Your first encounter with demons is about as speedy as one of the last half battles of Doom 2016. The thing that Doom Eternal has to work against all of the other games in the franchise is that flow of combat that always grips your attention. Every other Doom game you could play brain dead and just shoot some bad guys. Doom Eternal has you thinking constantly. The way the gameplay loop works is almost akin to like a rhythm game. Every piece of equipment, secondaries, all of this stuff is not just for damage, it also provides the character with a support item. The flamethrower gives you armor, the glory kills give you health, the ammo comes from chainsaw kills, and I know some people complain that the constantly being forced to use everything in my arsenal feels too sweaty, but I'd argue that you get into a flow with it, a pattern like a rhythm game, and you're hitting a flow of inputs that come at you during battle to try and make sure you're keeping up with everything. First my armor, then my ammo, then my health, now a grenade. Now I switch to my railgun to take out a turret on an arachnotron. Quickly switch to my grenade launcher to have a Caco demon swallow my grenade. My health is low, quick, another armor and another health glory kill, and so on and so forth. Constantly receiving these inputs, following the patterns, just like you would in a rhythm game. You get into the flow, and once you're in that flow, it's got you hooked. That constant demanding you're not brain dead while playing, you have to be thinking, it reminds me of how I felt about those last few levels of Doom 2016. Now it's been stretched for an entire playthrough. It never reaches the heights of just the Doom 2016 final 4 levels, but it does reach the amount of attention that it's grabbing from you. If there's one thing Doom Eternal succeeds at, it is keeping you on the edge of your seat with your railgun for the entire playthrough. No wait, I mean with your super shotgun, of course. That's what everybody always has on them at all times. But you're going to be on your edge of your seat every second of the experience. The system of having to use your arsenal means nothing is useless. You use everything at your disposal to win, and that's genius. You feel like a one-man army with all the gadgets, with all the weapon bonuses like flame grappling with your super shotgun. All of this is supporting you to be as aggressive as humanly possible. You don't win Doom by playing it like a cover shooter. And Eternal knows that the only way to win Doom is by strafing, dodging, being the aggressor as Doom Guy would be. It's why that rhythm system of the combat flow is in place, the switching between inputs as they prioritize themselves by what's most important to you right now, health, armor, or ammo. Every other Doom game, you could kind of cheese some fights. You didn't have to use all your weapons. Most of the time, you were never going to use a pistol. But to get through Doom Eternal, you must think with intent. You're always making a decision while in the air, on the fly, depending on what enemy there is, what weapon should I use, what part of my stats I need to focus on, whether it's health, armor, or getting damage on others, and focusing on what enemies I should be taking out first. Being just fast isn't going to cut it this time around. Now I must be strategic, intentful. Know I should use a rocket launcher to take out the Mancubus's hands, so that means he can't fire missiles at me anymore. But before going in for the glory kill, I also got to make sure I got all my resources up, keep up with those. And you're going to have to master everything, not just speed, everything to be the best player at Doom Eternal. It doesn't insult the player's intelligence, and I'm not saying that run and gun shooters without all of this do, but by allowing this amount of demand from the player, you're literally saying, like, I know you're capable of this. I know you can do this as a Doom player. I don't really understand the critique that they're forcing you to play the game the way the developer wants you to, because you still ultimately choose what you're prioritizing in this rhythm flow of inputs coming your way. It's intuitive, it's interactive, it's customizable. What are you going to prioritize in all of this? That's up to you. It's putting all of the trust in you as the player. If you think you can live with only 50 health left, then you might prioritize ammo because you might be running low. But if you know you're a tank, you're an aggressive player that's going to get hurt, you're going to prioritize health. It allows for that little bit of customization for everybody's playstyles. I would say this is my favorite gameplay loop in any Doom game ever. It may have my favorite combat loop in Doom history. It may be one of my favorite first-person shooters, but I'm not even going to pretend this thing is perfect. We're going to talk about the hiccups to Doom Eternal. The platforming is a major critique with Doom Eternal, and I kind of go back and forth about this one because it really isn't that bad. It's pretty quick, it's harmless, it's easy, it gets you from fight to fight. The platforming is also only like 5% of the whole game, and only about 2% of it is actually annoying because of this garbage. Some dunderhead thought that putting goo to slow down your gameplay was going to be a good idea for Doom. Usually when the tentacles pop up, the purple goo isn't that far off, and the swimming sections on top of all of this are the worst for platforming. And your 15-hour playthrough of Doom Eternal, you're probably going to be spending about like 30 minutes of that doing actual platforming. It's worth mentioning, but I don't think it's enough to hate on the game. The music also isn't that great this time around, and there's a reason. I'm going to breeze through this, so don't be mad if I don't get every little detail in this. We're going through an entire company retrospective. This is a very small part of it, but Mike Gordon was hired after the fantastic job he did on the Doom 2016 music. Shout out to the theme of that game right here, by the way. Mike Gordon was in the middle of moving when he was hired for Eternal, and lots of the stuff he was working on was restricting his time. I'm going to call him Mick Gordon for McDonald's. Mick Gordon couldn't finish off all the tracks before the release date, so id offered a guy in the studio to work on making mixes that weren't done by Mick Gordon. They weren't going to be his, but it was so they could finish it on time. Mick said that was fine, but ultimately the fan base found out that a lot of the songs were low quality and not very good, so they pointed the finger at Gordon. Mick Gordon admitted that the tracks weren't really made by him. A lot of them were done by this person in-house. And id turned the tables and blamed Mick Gordon for never turning in the tracks by the deadline. Mick Gordon should have been given a little bit more time here, and they shouldn't have put all this pressure on him, especially considering how much Gordon has done for them with the masterpiece soundtrack for Doom 2016. But I will side with it on one thing, and that's how public Mick Gordon made all of this. He was accusing them of not paying him, and he also pointed at them about the crunch time about it. He could have resolved a lot of this behind closed doors with it, and probably could have been still making music for them with Doom the Dark Ages, but it's just not happening ever again due to how awful this situation was treated by id and by Gordon. I think id is more in the wrong than Mick, because if they were avoiding paying him, they shouldn't have done that, and I think not giving him enough time in the first place was a little bit scummy. I also just think if you wanted to remain on good terms with the company, you wouldn't have publicized the whole event and made it as much as a spectacle as you did. Anyway, going off from that situation, Doom Eternal's music feels repetitive, and it feels worse in Doom 2016 as a result of all of this, and Mick Gordon is not coming back to do Doom the Dark Ages. He is doing some composing for a survival horror game that's coming out called Routine, if you want to check out his music in the future. Follow his career, support him, he's a talented artist, he deserves better than just the treatment of Doom. The multiplayer is another big problem with Doom Eternal. They decided to make a multiplayer where 2 people played as demons versus 1 Doom Slayer. So there were 3 players in every match. This is good for one thing. And I almost think this was intentional because of how quickly the player base died out for Doom 2016. And that's that the player base, even if it does die out, all you need are 3 players to play a match. Even if nobody's on the multiplayer, you can still find 3 players to play with. You don't need that 2 full sets of teams. How many times have you been on a dead game and there's only been 3 players, 4 players, and you guys can't start a match because you need 6 players on each team? This completely bypasses that. There's almost always going to be at least 3 players on Doom Eternal. And every other way, I don't really care for this multiplayer. It doesn't feel very balanced, and now that the Dread Knight was added in with an update, it's by far the most OP character, and I know this because I play as the Dread Knight, and I absolutely fucking slaughter people who have put hundreds of hours into playing as the Doom Slayer because of the Rage ability that will kill a Doom Slayer in like 4 seconds. It's brutal. It's very, very hard to counter. I'm not the type of person to talk a lot about balancing. I don't really talk about the meta in video gaming. I think it's very boring conversations to talk about like stat differences and the meta to things. I think the fact that I'm saying that they should have patched this character, it says enough about how OP that character is, because the fact I'm noticing it, it shows it's very, very noticeable and very broken, because I don't normally care about things like this. What was the whole reason I started talking trash about this brilliant game? Oh yeah, I wanted to tell you all what I sympathize with when it comes up to the combat flow and what people don't like about it. The balancing between all your resources and combat can be bad for one big reason. Doom is known for running and gunning, that you can hop into it at any point and understand exactly what you're doing. You're just going to be running around shooting demons. It's fun. Doom Eternal does not have that ability. Let's say you get halfway into Doom Eternal and you take a month-long break from playing the game, and then you come back to Doom Eternal and you play a level that you love, or you continue the story where you left off. It is going to be so tough to get back into it, because you're going to have to get used to all the controls again, all the rhythm feeling that you lost, the patterns that you were learning. There's an adjustment period. The adjustment that you had to creating this rhythm feeling of getting all these inputs in and balancing out all of your resources, that's going to be gone if you take a break from this game. I don't think that this makes any of it bad, but the whole resource system, it's just the least accessible thing in Doom. That is the big thing that I sympathize with a lot of people on. It's very inaccessible compared to most other Doom games. I've heard some people say that the ammo seems too low, or it's hard to keep up with your resource management, and I don't think that's true, because I believe when you're viewing it as a flow, that once you get into that flow with your arsenal, it's not very hard to keep up with. It still demands your attention, but if it's just too hard for you, then just turn down the difficulty. Not everybody needs to be playing sweaty or playing on ultra violence mode to have fun. This game you can have fun on the easiest difficulty. That's all my complaints with the base game of Eternal. Most of these are nitpicks, and if you're one of those people who hates the game, I'm sorry, because I really do think people are missing out hard who don't enjoy this. Doom Eternal's pacing is the greatest thing ever when it wants to be, when you're in combat, because it feels like you're a dancing ballerina with your super shotgun flying around projectiles, doing parkour, and doing Slayer gates. But then the exploration features hit, the puzzles, the Fortress of Doom, and they slow everything down. It's not at all bad stuff, but the pacing just takes a complete stop after you just got done doing the craziest shootout you've ever had in any video game ever. And then the pacing just stops to make you do a puzzle, or to go back to the Fortress of Doom, or do whatever. The pacing is the best and the worst thing here, because when it's good, it's the best time you're ever going to have in an FPS. But when it slows down, you're going to be tapping your foot, racing to the next battle, like, why the heck am I slowing down? Like, what is happening? Because your adrenaline's just going to be pumping to get to that next battle. Can we talk about that Doom Eternal is like the goofiest game in the franchise also? I don't see a lot of people talking about this. Doom 2016 felt design-wise kind of similar to Doom 3. Eternal feels similar to 1 and 2 with just new graphics, the skyboxes that match the ones from the original games but with just a new system. Look at the skybox here, the giant pentagrams on skyscrapers, that feels like it's straight ripped from Doom 2 Hell on Earth. The Fortress of Doom being Doom Guy's space lair with a giant mech suit being built into it, and he can teleport out of there to go fight demons. What? They even have a reference to the original Doom Bunny, which by the way, I want to make a note that my bunny in real life is named after the Doom Bunny. We all salute you, Daisy. You're the reason why Doom Guy still exists today. There's vinyls on the walls of the Fortress of Doom that you can blast while shooting a grenade down a Kako demon's throat, while it makes this over-the-top swallowing sound effect that sounds straight out of a Looney Tunes cartoon. The sound effects of pulling out their eye is even goofy. The costumes where you can dress your Doom Guy as Conan the Barbarian while taking out everyone. All the terror and the horror of Doom is gone here. It's been replaced by vibrant colors, sound effects that are from a Saturday morning cartoon, playing dress-up doll with Doom Guy, and exploring your egotistical good guy fortress in space. This is all so silly. I'm saying all this complimentary. I don't mind silly, but it is. There's a bunch of bullshit in there, they're like, oh, Doomslayer, he's some legend who comes around when he's needed by humanity, and he gets a bunch of lore, right? Here's his lore. You want the lore of Doom guy? No. Doom fans do not give a shit about the lore of Doom guy. None of this matters. Just make him a guy who lost his pet bunny to demons and now he wants to kill everything. Who cares to go deeper than that? If you're gonna take the 90s shooter formula, then take the formula of not making a story either. Just who cares? Speaking of going deeper, we gotta talk about it, because I'm not the only one talking. Doomslayer talks.
Guts. Huge guts. Kill them. Must kill them all.
And yeah, it's pretty dumb. In 2004, Doom 3 works as the most grounded in the series. If you were ever going to have the Space Marine talk, it would have been here. You didn't have the main character talk in the most realistic game in the series, but you had him speak in the goofiest game in the series. Like, imagine being in a boardroom meeting. Like, what did id think the reactions were going to be from audience members? Because him talking, I could imagine was going to be one of two things. Either people saying, meh, it's fine, who cares, I guess, whatever. Which that's the camp that I'm in. Or it was going to be reactions of people angry, like most old Doom fans who think Doom guy should never talk. That's my question about all of this. Did the people who greenlight this think that people were actually going to be cheering when he started talking, or did they just not know that Doom guy was a silent protagonist? I'm almost inclined to think that they just didn't know. There's no way somebody thought people were going to be cheering if they heard Doom guy talking. It's just a weird choice and a weirdly deep story for a game where the whole point of it is just killing as many demons as humanly possible. Like, who cares? Eternal is probably the most polarizing Doom game outside of 3, and that's so interesting to me. None of what I'm saying that's negative about it really matters all that much to me. I just felt like it was worth noting. I would easily give Eternal a 9 to a 10 out of 10. When this thing is good, it is my favorite Doom game ever made. But because of how polarizing of a Doom game it is due to its pacing and its resource management system, and I do personally think it's a little bit inaccessible, and I don't care for some of the platforming or the slowed down sections, so I'm going to put Doom Eternal into Archvile A tier with Doom 2016. At its height, it is easily sinfully S tier, and it's the best Doom game ever. But at its lows, with the slower sections, with its inaccessibility, the multiplayer, it's a Cacodemon C tier. I just adore the gameplay loop, and I love the fighting so much that I can ignore a lot of the actual flaws because I love the highs so much. It's Archvile A tier. Oh wait, yeah, there's 2 expansion packs. Shit! Ancient Gods 1 and 2. God damn, I honestly don't even care to talk about these straight up. I have to look in the mirror and like tell myself I want to talk about these. I want to talk about these. I want to talk about these. It's like I'm demanding myself to get out there and defend them. But I'm done defending Doom Eternal. I already gave it Archvile A tier for not being as sweaty or as hard people make it out to be. And I'm just not going to be able to defend Ancient Gods 1 and 2. Yeah, you see this gameplay right here? It looks kind of hard, doesn't it? But like, look how good it is, you know? And I'm sure it's like a little bit hard, but it's nothing. This is the easiest difficulty. This is what the easiest difficulty looks like on the DLCs. No game developer should expect this from you on easy mode. To put this in perspective, on the base game, I play on ultra violence. I refuse to do that on the DLC because it's just ridiculous. And earlier I said if the game is too hard, lower the difficulty. That's so true for the base game. I normally play the game on ultra violence. So the fact that I'm lowering all the way down to easy mode just to have a fun time is absurd. I cannot imagine what this is like for most Doom players. Like, most Doom players probably have a tough time even playing this on easy mode. It's not that it's tough just because it's hard. It's tough for different reasons. Let's go all the way back to the Golden Age. Rewind. Let's go back to the Doom 2 expansions that felt like they were made for the top 1% of Doom players and disregarded everybody else. Ancient Gods 1 and 2 do the exact same thing. It's not made for the average player, and I dislike that about it. It's made for people who actually want to stress out and feel exhausted by the end. The DLCs took the complaint about like the platforming and the puzzle stuff, and they lowered the amount that stuff is in the DLCs by a lot for the sake of trying to maintain this constant action. But also this is Doom, so there always has to be a reason as to why they slow down your gameplay, whether it's the platforming, whether it's backtracking. There always has to be something that's slowing down the Doom gameplay. And here it's the new enemies. They all suck and they slow down your gameplay constantly. It's what they're good at. The eyeball pods just stand perfectly still while you unload an entire clip into them to make them go away. These are boring turrets that don't encourage you to move around, but instead just sit there and fire at them and spam a whole clip. There's these new blue ghost enemies that beef up random demons, which is annoying because then it makes all the demons that are never known for being bullet sponges, and it makes one of them a bullet sponge. It's never fun to fight them, and they just shouldn't have been added. It's frustrating. I know I said earlier that they lower the puzzles and the platforming, so if you're looking for constant action in a Doom game, you might think this is for you. But Ancient Gods doesn't understand what people mean when they say they want a non-stop action Doom title. This is one arena, no other fights, one fight going on for as long as possible. It will go on for 15 minutes. I'm not even joking. There's 15 to 20 minute long fights that just keep on going, and you think they're done, and then they just keep on going. It's just exhausting. And that's not what people wanted when they asked for a high-octane, constant action Doom game. We wanted fight after fight with little filler, not one fight that just gets dragged out forever with no breathing room. It's weird for me that the second part of the DLC is easier than the first part. It makes for some very odd pacing. The second level is also boring environment-wise. I don't like the following around the ghost dog section where you're just fighting hordes of bad guys. That's just not very entertaining. The last thing I'll say about part 1 is that I guess the boss fight is a little bit better than part 2's. And on to Ancient Gods Part 2, we start the game with a recap. Wait, are we joking with this recap? I'm not watching The Sopranos. Hell no, I'm skipping this. I'm playing Doom. Just let me get to the good stuff and shut the hell up. The good stuff here is easier than the last DLC, and overall I like this expansion more than the first one. There's a massive scale to it that's fantastic. We've never seen this big of a scale. Like, there is a spectacle here that the only other game from id Software I'm seeing match this spectacle is Doom the Dark Ages that hasn't even come out yet. The final battle in particular looks like a war is happening around you. The backdrops are gorgeous, and the scale is just something that makes you feel like the biggest badass. You're not just fighting a group in a tiny arena anymore. It feels like you're fighting an army of demons. We've never had a big fight like this where there's so many people battling around you. It feels like you're the most vital part to something that's already huge. The scale being more spectacle based and the difficulty being better is what makes me like this already more than the last one. But if you thought the part 1 boss fight was lame, just wait for part 2's, because it is the worst thing I have ever experienced in Doom in my life. It leaves such a bad taste that it feels like I just ate a delicious filet mignon Doom Ancient Gods Part 2 and then just shoved a bar of soap into my mouth. Like, all the flavors of gorgeous backdrops and battles are gone. The final boss here is the opposite of Doom Guy. He's Hell's version of the protagonist, and you have to battle him one-on-one. Sounds cool, it looks cool, but I'm gonna break down a few quick points on why it is not good, it's not cool, and in fact it is the worst thing I've ever done in Doom. Half of the boss's moves take back health, which makes the fight drag out for a lot longer if you're not timing things well enough. He can rejuvenate his entire health bar in one attack if he tries to, or at least his whole current health bar. Because guess what? There's also 5 phases for this boss. His moveset is basically just the Marauder, but like a lame version of it. The Marauder works in Eternal because he's the only enemy that you have to have a little bit of patience with. He spices up the gameplay, and even though I don't love the Marauder as much as some people, I respect him as an addition though, but because Evil Doom Guy over here is just a harder Marauder, he's tougher, he can regain health, that patience aspect of the Marauder feels just plain annoying now. If you were patient with the Marauder, you can kill him in less than 10 seconds, which is nice. But Evil Doom Guy over here can go on for 30 minutes. His moveset is borderline the same thing as the Marauder, and it barely changes as he segues through phases. Him as a final test is meant to give the Doom player the challenge of patience, but in a game where the entire fucking point is rewarding me for being the least patient iPad temper tantrum throwing child is the stupidest possible thing you could do for a final boss. It's not quick like the Marauder, so it's just the same moveset but with 500 times the amount of health. The evil Doom guy is also slower than the Marauder, who will actually charge at you and speed up the process of the battle. Evil Doom guy will just stand here and he'll look at you like this. I can deal with patient stuff, but get that garbage out of Doom. The Dark Lord, aka Evil Doom Guy, is one of the most disappointing final boss fights I have ever played in a video game, and it's one of the worst I've played in probably the past couple of years. I don't play a lot of terrible video games, so there's probably some out there that are much worse than this, but out of all the games I do play, this is one of the worst boss fights I've done in a while. I don't know what they were thinking here, and I am just relieved to be done with it. Done with this patience crap put into my super anti-patience video game, done with the history of id, done with the polarizing Doom game Eternal, done with the Mike Gordon drama with id Software, and I'm done with everything. Guys, I'm finished with the whole id Software retrospective timeline. Chapter 11. The Actual End. This was fun for me. id Software has always held a special place in my heart. They represent so much of my childhood with the classic Doom games, and I think the Golden Age for me shows how much of an influence that they had over the entire industry. The Dark Ages shows them at a time of desperation and experimentation, being timid to grow their employee numbers and waiting for the last of the founders to leave id, like Tom Hall did early on, John Romero did at the end of the Golden Ages with Quake, Adrian Carmack did after Doom 3, and John Carmack at the end of the Dark Ages after Rage. These games mean so much to me, and at a time in 2020 when it felt like the entire world had stopped for so many people, I bet Doom Eternal, with how fast it is, made it feel like things could just keep on going. You could just keep on fighting everything. You could just keep on going. That's how the classic Dooms felt for me as well. If anything just stopped, I could always go on to Doom, and it felt like everything just revolved around blasting my way through demons. Felt like everything else around me just kind of disappeared for a while. I could just get invested. I'm happy I got to share all my opinions on these games while also discussing the tragic history of friendships that collapsed at id Software. id Software talks about how the whole point of Doom 2016 was just to bring back the run and gun genre. The whole point of Eternal they talk about was to bring in acrobatic movement into Doom. And the whole point of Dark Ages is to make you a tank. This is their words, not mine. They're so dedicated to making sure every game has its own positives and reasons to go back and revisit it, because honestly, even if you're the type of person who wants a more faster paced game than Doom Eternal, why would I play Doom Eternal if the next sequel is just more Doom Eternal? I wouldn't revisit it then. They're giving you reasons to revisit every single Doom game, and I love that. That gives a franchise longevity and timelessness. id Software is a company that, unlike most things I talk about on this channel, they didn't really innovate a lot of things after the 90s, and in fact, if anything, they just proved that nothing that they did previously was outdated. It's all just good game design. That's the most unique thing about them. They are all about proving that it wasn't outdated. It has nothing to do with innovation after Quake. id Software after Quake 3 wasn't pushing boundaries. They were all about taking what they already did and proving that it was good. It's not timely, it is timeless. id Software started from 4 guys, 4 relationships. They were all broken up by the end, but through 3 revolutionary FPS games that made them the godfathers of that history with Wolfenstein, Doom, and Quake. The nightmare production of Quake spawned 2 employees who just didn't get along. Their feud ended up with their downfall. After the split up of those 2, id Software tried licensing out stuff, trying new things, and for the most part, it didn't work for people in the 2000s. The beautiful and disliked by some fans Doom 3 was a result of that. The drama of maintaining a small focused crew versus expanding out and having a larger number of developers come in. We talked about the difference between all the games and the departure from the art style of Quake 1. The multiplayer focus of id Software with Quake 3, and finally the crash out of the Dark Ages with Rage. We went over the comeback and the evolving of single-player games with rules from a dusted-up playbook that was from 1993. The Rage 2 being a financial pit, but a resurrection of a dead franchise. And now, We all live in uncertainty with all the founders being gone from id, but also not knowing if id Software will do anything else with their franchises except for Doom. Do we think they're going to ever come back, maybe make a Wolfenstein game, bring back Quake, or are they just going to only do Doom from here on out? I'm still out here just begging for them to drop all the story crap in Doom, but you know, whatever. All that aside, as long as they keep on pumping out great games, you're not going to hear that much complaining from me about it. Look over that timeline again. I'm waving goodbye with my rocket launcher in hand. And join us on future company and franchise retrospectives on Appreciation Culture. This has been the Appreciator talking. What do you want out of id Software? What are your hot takes on id Software games? Do you like Doom 3? Do you think the old Doom games are garbage? Comment down below and please support the video, because video essays can sometimes be difficult to garner engagement on because people will put them on the background when they're at work, and that's the point of this video. The point of this video is that you set it on the background at work, you listen to it before going to bed, you listen to it while you're just playing games or something. It's meant to be on in the background, but I am asking you, please comment. It really does help out. Even if it's not a hot take or something controversial, which is always accepted as well. Welcome on board, Appreciator, and feel free to join our community by jumping into the Discord or Twitch following down below. My number one thought is when id Software is finally going to bring back Quake. Who knows if id will even keep on being a success if they rely on Doom. The only thing we know on this channel is we're going to be appreciating every single little piece of art out there. And I will always appreciate you.